Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. This is a story about what if Naruto has Uzumaki clan ancestor bloodline. Before I start, please support for more amazing content and do consider subscribing to my channel and share this video with your friends. This is written by Helghy and link in description and support writer. Let's start the video. Chapter 1, Heir to the Clan. It had been scarcely over 4 years since the attack of the nine-tailed fox. The damage wrought by the beast had been devastating, and the casualties from that single night had been worse than the losses that Konoha suffered at the hands of the Iwat during the Third War. Even now there were some sections of the village still showing signs of the damage done to them. Even now, there were some sections of the village that still haven't recovered from the damage. Most notably were the southern farming and residential districts which had been heavily hit that night. It had taken some time, but the buildings and fields had since rebounded. New homes and shops and new rotations of crops replaced the wrecked battlescape. Buildings can be rebuilt and crops can be regrown, but to replace the loss of human life is not so simple. Everyone in Konoha had been affected. Some more than others, and arguably the civilians most of all, being as their living quarters made up the majority of the residential district, hence the name. Despite that, and as cold-hearted as the thought was, the true loss that night had been the large number of shinobi, or more precisely, the large number of high-profile shinobi. Shinichi Inyazuka, head of the Inyazuka clan, husband of Tsume Inyazuka and father of 2 children, was killed early on while leading a group of his clansmen to try and stall the beast. While they inevitably failed, they helped to minimize the damage the fox could do before it was defeated by the 4th Hokage, who was arguably the shinobi of greatest note that died that night. Minato Namikaze, 4th Hokage, war hero, sealing genius, known by the names of the Yellow Flash, the Yellow Devil, and a series of far less kind titles from foreign nations. It was Minato who defeated the fox and according to some, destroyed, according to others sealed. However, it was well known that he was not alone in that task. Kushina Uzumaki, the Whirlpool Princess, the Red Death, the Red Hot Habanero, and supposedly the last Uzumaki. Luckily, she had survived the terrible night. Shortly after giving birth she had restrained the beast with her chains during the last moments of the battle, allowing for its defeat. She was the living hero of the battle as it were. Despite that, some, though very few, blamed her, word of her being the previous Jinchuriki having of course leaked to the masses at some point in the confusion following such a disaster. While a few blamed her, some others turned their blame onto her newly made Jinchuriki son. Thankfully by far the majority of the village was not foolish enough to hate the woman and her child. Sadly there still remained the difference in views between shinobi and civilians. This in itself had created a divide in Konoha. While less than 10 knew of the boy's paternity, the whole of the village knew he was Kushina's only child and heir to the Uzumaki clan. As if the red hair wasn't enough of a giveaway. The village was split, the shinobi were protective of the boy. He was the jail of the beast. The only thing keeping the fox from reforming and wreaking vengeance on their village, and he was the last heir to the Uzumaki clan. To the civilians though he was largely avoided. They held resentment towards the beast he carried, but how could they hate the child? The child was one of their saviors, the child who had been burdened with the duty of carrying the beast in order to protect the village. Sadly, not hating him doesn't mean that they don't fear him. Few wished the child to remain in Konoha. Many saw his remaining in the village as a threat, a danger to their well-being. He was like a bomb just waiting to go off in their eyes. That largely led to him being ostracized, if still respected for his clan and his sacrifice. Fewer among that number were actually willing to do something to remove him from Konoha at any cost. It wasn't personal of course, but they had to protect their families. They were sure Lady Kushina would come to understand. They would expect the same from her if the situations were reversed. In the end, she would see it their way right. So it was with supposedly heavy hearts that a small collection of wealthy civilians, all coincidentally high-level members of Konoha's Civilian Goods Guild, struck an accord with those savages from Hidden Cloud. They were given strict instructions they could take only the Uzumaki boy and no harm should befall his mother. What most of the fools had not realized is that Kumo had been after Kushina almost since she was born. They had practically given them the route to take both of the only known living Uzumaki in the world, one of which was Jinchuriki of the most powerful of the 9-tailed beasts. The Cloud honestly couldn't believe the short-sightedness of their rivals in Konoha. The conspirators had convinced themselves that all around they were doing the right thing. They were ridding Konoha of the time bomb that was their Jinchuriki, and should he lose control in Kumo, all the better to weaken the strongest of their rival nations. Not to mention, swayed only slightly by the words of their new acquaintances from Cloud, the Goods Guild were certain this would be a catalyst for change as well. The ways of absolute dictatorship by the cages was over and a new, more democratic system would replace it. Once the fallout from tonight became apparent they were sure they would have enough leverage to pressure the old monkey into finally caving to their stream of petitions for more representation among the people of the village. The days of shinobi dictatorships running the village to support their nation's war effort were over and more democratic means were needed to replace them. That was the set of circumstances that had led to 2 4-year-old children and 1 injured young woman being roughly kidnapped in the dead of night by the head jonin of Kumo and his team. Yasai Asato had expected things to go much smoother. Their informant within the Hyuga had said that the girl was weak and had little value outside of a breeding sow for future generations of Byakugan wielders. After the little toddler had managed to cause his entire left arm from the elbow down to go temporarily numb with a single strike, he had decided she would do much better as a properly indoctrinated Kumo Kunoichi. She definitely showed promise, he couldn't really tell where they got the idea of her being a failure from. The Uzumaki boy likewise was a goldmine. The son of the Red Death seemed prodigious in his use of his chakra constructs, just like his mother. That is of course why he was down one guard at the moment. Yasai had to wonder how much the Red Death had actually taught the child. He, like a few other high-ranking shinobi, knew about the chakra chain constructs he and his mother used. They were a conditional hidden technique, an ability that needed both special circumstances and rigorous training to use, even though it was technically not a bloodline. Not so different from the black lightning used in Kumo or the shadow techniques of the Nara clan. Kushina had clearly been teaching the boy, such techniques didn't just happen to appear. Not to mention he had been a slippery little brat, the toddler was obviously undergoing some shinobi training already. That wasn't necessarily surprising for a clan heir, and even less so for a Jinchuriki. Still though, the usual belief for those not native to Konoha was that the Hidden Leaf were far softer on their children and less prone to teaching them at early ages. To teach them from practically the moment they could walk was a sickening concept to them in all honesty. Then again, so was kidnapping 2 toddlers with the express intent of using them as breeding machines to create generations of more powerful shinobi. Let alone what was planned for the once great Kushina Uzumaki. Yasai felt bad for the woman. She was young and beautiful, only a few years older than his own daughter, yet Kushina Uzumaki was a far cry from the Hokage candidate she had once been. It became quite clear that whatever happened the night of the Kyuubi attack had all but ruined her chakra system. Still, they had played it safe and made sure she was unconscious before she even had a chance to register the fact that the Anbu guarding her home were dead. Even after being hit with a potent drug and a Jinjutsu combo his team had perfected during the last war, she had come out swinging that sword with skill and grace she shouldn't have. They had to fight her briefly to render her unconscious. He was afraid they had been a little too rough on the poor woman. However, that train of thought had passed away when the boy had killed Kan with his chains. One minute the kid was terrified watching his mother fight Yasai's team, the next Kushina had crumpled and the brat screamed bloody murder before impaling Kan through the chest. He passed out right after, but still, things were not going as planned at all. As Yasai and his 3 remaining companions neared the village border, the man couldn't help but feel a flash of smugness at the lax nature of the Konoha fools. He had been so worried the whole time that the civilian idiots they dealt with had been plants to set them up for an ambush. Now though, he saw just how foolish they had become in their false peace. They let their guard down now that a treaty was supposedly signed, not only inviting them into a clan compound and even going so far as to place only a pair of Anbu as guards for the Uzumaki when foreign elements existed inside the village. It was sheer idiocy. It really did just seem too good to be true. But that worried thought in his mind, Yasai turned to tell his comrades to be ready for any sudden ambushes, only to find all 3 of them clutching at slit throats, while the unconscious Kushina was collected by a pair of masked nin before flickering away. He watched his childhood teammates and friends drown in their own blood as an enraged set of Konoha jonin glared at him, freezing the blood in his veins. "Release the children at once and surrender," the foremost man stated with a growl. He was an intimidating man to look at. Easily 6 foot with salt and pepper close-cropped hair. His eyes were black as coal, but seemed to burn right into Yasai's own with rage at the sight they saw. His shoulders were broad, and the jonin jacket was old and worn, but in more than capable shape for resisting the glancing blows it was designed to protect from. "I'm not going to repeat myself, cloud scum," he growled as the other shinobi encircled them. Yasai took a moment to count the 9 shinobi circling him, with the man in front of him coming to an even 10. Going from the knowledge he had on typical Konoha squad compositions during and after the Third Great War, there were probably another 2 hidden further back in the trees, watching for anyone that wasn't accounted for, with the 2 who took the Uzumaki head likely joined by a third or escort back to the hospital. Most likely he was dealing with 12 shinobi alone. Focusing back on the man before him, Yasai finally noticed with dread the armband he wore on his left arm. A blue band with a white spiral. Only worn by a select few people throughout history. Only believed to be worn by one man currently. Before him was undoubtedly one of the very few survivors of the massacre of Uzushio and the retainer and bodyguard of the Uzumaki clan head family. Hideki Tabibito, protector of Kushina Uzumaki and undoubtedly the protector of her beloved son as well. "I'll die first." "Then again, that's not necessary if you want these 2 unharmed, right?" Yasai said with a smirk. Hiding just how forced the smile on his face was, he moved to raise his knife to the throat of an unconscious Riti child in his arms. The Hyuga was already dropped unceremoniously on the ground. The greater of the two pieces of leverage was definitely the boy at the moment. Unfortunately for him, and fortunately for the Konohinin, he found himself unable to move, his blade still a good 4 inches from the boy. Blinking in confusion, Yasai's eyes then shot wide in realization and fear. The Nara shadow binding technique. It was strong, and he wouldn't be able to free himself from the jutsu. "You'll die, but only when we let you." A new voice said as Yasai turned his eyes back to look at the shinobi before him. Stepping from the collection of other Konohinin, a man dressed in elegant nightwear with a dark scowl and pronounced veins around his pale eyes made his way up to the ensnared Kumonin. Somehow looking gentle and menacing in equal measure, he began tapping spots on Yasai's body before removing the boy from his now weak hold and also retrieving the girl from the ground. Stepping next to Tababito, the fully visible Hiashi Hyuga handed him the red-headed toddler while he gently carried his own daughter. "Make sure this trash makes it to T&I alive. He has a lot to answer for." Tababito said with a hiss as he and Hiashi turned and left the clearing, as if carrying their kids home from a long day playing at the park. But that Yasai heard a couple of steps behind him before something was jabbed into his neck and the world soon began to spin before turning dark. When he began to wake up, Naruto suddenly gasped and his eyes shot open as he began trying to take in his strange surroundings. The boy quickly relaxed though when the fatherly smile of his Uncle Tabi came into view. He quickly hugged the old man who reciprocated the hug. "Good to see you finally waking up, kiddo. I know the first thing you want to ask, so don't worry, your mom is okay. She's resting in another room around the corner." The deep rumbling voice of Mr. Tababito said with a bit of a chuckle. Naruto broke the hug and sighed loudly in relief as he nodded slightly and smiled up at the man. Just looking at the boy's relief had his guardian smiling fondly back at him. While the man wasn't always around, he ensured both Naruto and his mother were well taken care of, and should any issues with regards to the clan arise that Kushina couldn't handle herself, he handled them on her behalf. When he wasn't around, the man had organized several other Konohinin, most notably his mother's old team and some friends of his to help take care of him. The boy's smile had stayed for a mere moment before it quickly slid off again as his eyes began to water. The memories of the night before bombarding him suddenly. Flashes of the strange men attacking his mother and the bodies of his family's normal Anbu protectors. He remembered freezing up as he watched his mother fight before seeing her collapse to the ground in pain. Then he had just reacted, without meaning to, out of terror. "Uncle Tabi, I hurt that man. I didn't mean to hurt him. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Naruto began. He was crying now, and the words were barely understandable through the choked sobs racking his tiny frame. He kept repeating that he was sorry as he gasped for air through his tears. The Uzumaki guardian was a bit stunned by the boy's sudden mood change, but quickly realized the cause as he heard the broken words. Naruto didn't seem to even realize he had actually shredded that man, effectively killing him with his chains. It was a bit surprising that he had in the first place, honestly. Hideki had been helping Kushina work on Naruto's chakra control and manipulation for the last 2 years. He would be a clan head one day, so early training was a must to master his quickly growing reserves. One of the exercises he had been working on was the Uzumaki hidden technique to bring out the chains in question. The kid had yet to create one more than a foot in length or thicker than his wrist, but he had been able to use the jutsu a few times in the past. With his training and the stress of the situation, it was only natural he would instinctively try to protect himself. But the size of his chakra reserves already dwarfing any other child his age, even other Jinchuriki, Naruto had given himself a mild case of chakra exhaustion by the pure amount he had dumped into the technique, and the size of chain he'd used on the man had been as wide as the boy's own shoulders and long enough that it had burst through the wall and roof on the other side before dispelling as he fell unconscious. Hideki remained with the boy, whispering comforting words and rubbing his tiny back to ease his troubles. He would do what he could, but planned to let Kushina give him the talk. Hideki may have been a master in infiltration and espionage tactics, but understanding emotions and feelings still remained a troublesome concept for him to grasp. It has been the same way ever since his childhood, and he doubted that would change anytime soon. Danzo made his way to Hirizen's office at the Hokage Tower, knowing that by now he would be managing their forces from his headquarters. Possibly still in his nightwear if he rushed here straight from bed. Koharu and Homura would likely be the last of their old group of veterans to arrive, so it would hopefully give him a chance to speak candidly with his old rival for a few moments. While as calm as he normally appeared, below the surface, Danzo was an inferno of rage and indignation. A small percentage of which centered itself on his old friend. He had told him, warned him, that the idiots of one of the commercial guilds were meeting with strangers from Cloud. He told him Kumo wasn't serious in their attempt at peace. His ire toward Hirizen came from having been dismissed with a simple "I have it all in hand." As was usual with his arrogant comrade. Still his true hatred bubbled at the audacity of that gorilla aide doing something like this at all. He always had a special hatred for the Cloud. His first wife and child had been in Uzushio when Kiri and Kumo launched their invasion. Truly back then Konoha and Yuzu had been like one nation with two disconnected provinces. He had hated them even more when they had tried to kidnap the little Yuzu princess when she was a child. He hadn't known her well, but her predecessor Mito had a hand in raising his entire team, and seeing her successor and last of her family nearly turned into breeding stock had him practically breathing fire. In his usually silent and stoic way. The events that happened tonight though took the cake when it came to the subject. Killing Konoha Anbu was one thing, trying to kidnap the same woman they had already tried to as a child, as well as two children barely out of diapers, for the sole purpose of turning them into loyal reproduction machines, all under the guise of a treaty. They had only just taken his position as the Raikage within the last few years. Some would forgive the man for such brash action. Danzo would not. He'd already had his route rounding up those he suspected of conspiring in this mess. Spineless fools as he expected. They would crack just as the Jonin captured by Tababito would. Danzo had expected some kind of action, but to make such bold actions like this spoke more toward the situation than he would have liked to admit. That they captured or killed every member of the group would send a message that he wanted every village leader to hear. With the end of the Third War, every village had experienced a massive baby boom. As was usual, following the wars in the elemental nations. However, the largest had been, as it always was, with Konoha. Once more they were poised to be the uncontested enforcers of the temporary peacetime on the continent. One night 4 years ago had ruined that perfect situation completely. With the Kyuubi attack, Konoha's population had suffered tremendously. The biggest issue not actually being the initial destruction by the fox. It killed plenty of course. Konoha's primary orphanage near the southern market had been completely obliterated along with every one of the future shinobi within. The true issue had been the falling fertility rate for those impacted by the beast's corrupted chakra. Many grew sick and died in the following days, many more than were killed by the fox directly. Of those that survived, 1 in 20 could no longer have children. Male or female, the results were nearly the same. It was catastrophic, and so more civilians than ever would be pushed into the shinobi ranks, making them feel all too entitled. As for Cloud, they hadn't had a Biju rampage in nearly a decade. Even then their geography always kept the damage to a minimum. What's more was their population boom had been the third largest but was unaffected by any sort of disaster afterward. That meant a full batch of fresh Kumonin on the horizon. Add in that Kumo's Jinchurikis were the lauded perfect Jinchuriki, Killer Bee, and a young Kunoichi prodigy evidently nearing 15, who seemed to be quickly gaining her own near-perfect control of her beast. With all this, Kumo had grown bold, but all it had taken was a single slip-up, and Danzo planned to capitalize on the failing immediately. He might even be able to force the treaty with what he had in mind. Either way, this would be a black eye for the Cloud for a long time to come. Konoha now once more appeared as though it was solidly the strongest of hidden villages. Even should Kumo feel bold enough to threaten war with their phantom population, Danzo knew Konoha had the negotiating advantage. If Kumo refused to play ball, they could turn plenty of Kumo's would-be allies against them with the simple knowledge of what they attempted. Plus, while Konoha wanted desperately to avoid continued warfare at the moment, they had always had the largest population as well as the greatest amount of freaks, as other villages called their monstrous prodigies. They would win a war with the Cloud still, even if it might hurt them to do so. I was wondering how long until you arrived, old friend. Hiruzen said tiredly from behind his desk while Danzo fully entered the room. He nearly scoffed at the look of his old friend. Trying to hide his night clothes under the Hokage robe. Who did he think he fooled? Yes, I did of course come right after getting dressed. Danzo replied flatly, getting a slight chuckle from the Hokage. I should have known you would hassle me about something as stupid as what I'm wearing. You sound like a Haru. Hiruzen replied, and the pair were silent briefly before Danzo took his place beside the desk. How bad is it? Danzo finally asked. Not as bad as it could be. They were caught before they even left the inner perimeter. The conspirators they used to gain entry already broke under Ibiki and Inoichi as well. Hinata Hyuga is perfectly fine. She was cleared by the medics earlier, just some lasting effects of the drug used to keep her unconscious, and she will be fine. Hiashi has his compound completely locked down still though. Saratobi explained. I told you about that guild, Hiruzen. Danzo scolded. I have had them under watch by Anbu ever since you did. We already had them in interrogation before the kidnapping, after they met with this Yasai character earlier in the day. We just didn't know who the targets were till they struck. Would you believe these fools were so far divorced from reality, they not only thought the Cloud Nin would only target Naruto, but that they would be rewarded somehow for giving foreign shinobi away in and out of the village. As well as surrendering one of our greatest assets to our biggest rival, Hiruzen explained. You're joking, right? Not even slightly, these fools thought such a thing could pressure me into giving civilians more say in the village. Hiruzen said. He was still baffled by their thought process himself. We've been too soft on our villagers. The cloud makes its civilians completely subservient to their shinobi. Danzo groused. True, and they also receive far less contracts and mission requests than we do with our humble and friendly appearance. Hiruzen pointed out, getting a sigh and nod from his rival. You told me about the Hyuga side of things, what about the Uzumakis? Danzo asked. Hiruzen's soft sigh caused the hair on the old man's neck to stand on end. Kushina and Naruto Uzumaki were essentially the pinnacle of VIP in Konoha. Especially the boy. The boy, is he? Danzo began to ask. Naruto will be fine. He had mild chakra exhaustion from dumping nearly his entire reserve into a single technique. From what Hideki-kun told me, he saw both of the guards' bodies and saw his mother injured in her brief fight with the Kumo-nin. He lashed out with his chains and practically skewered one before passing out. The boy tasted his first kill tonight, though he is still not aware. Sarutobi explained with a grimace. Earlier than should be necessary, but the boy should be told. Dottie will have to bear that weight eventually, and knowing he already has a notch on his belt could help him in the future. Danzo suggested. The boy just had his 4th birthday, Danzo. The current era isn't the same one we lived in. Children need a childhood to live long enough to replace us. Hiruzen said. He isn't like the other children, Hiruzen. You know that. Jinchuriki or not, he would still remain a target for the other villages for who he is. Clearly for good reason too. Kushina couldn't form stable chains till she was nearly 7. He's hardly 4. He needs to be trained and prepared for battle if you want him to replace us. It's the only way he'll make it that long. Oh? So what do you propose? We chuck him into your root program that is so clearly effective and crank out another mindless drone with less than half the potential that he has now? The cage snapped. No. Besides, even if I did suggest that, the route has changed. Tobirama-sensei's control over suppression seemed to have been the better path all along. I can acknowledge my failure in that. I'm trying to fix what I can with the last batches of recruits, but that doesn't change the fact that Uzumaki will need the training increased. Where is Haddock? She could help in his training alongside Kushina and Tabibito when he's in the village. Hiruzen was surprised by Danzo's admission, though he moved past it rather quickly. He knew the kind of person Danzo was. Cold and calculating. He had adopted the more extreme root doctrine several years ago, following the deaths of his own genin who he had used Tobirama's system with. Believing he could improve the training regimen, he had instead broken his shinobi into little more than tools. The fact that he was moving back to the old system filled Hiruzen with hope for his old friend once more. Ira was on a mission to Yuki no Kuni. The reports she has sent back so far with her summons have been worrisome to say the least. We may be looking at a change in players soon. Not just there either, I have reports all across the continent saying regimes are changing. Hiruzen answered. As if that's any different than last week or a decade ago. Danzo scoffed, getting an amused nod from his friend. That may be, but it pays to pay attention. There is an issue though, regarding Kushina. We'll discuss it later. Kaharu and Hamura are finally here. Sarutobi said, getting a nod from Danzo. The other 2 elders entered the office after a brisk knock, and soon the 4 old teammates were running through several scenarios on how to play the situation to Konoha's benefit. It would prove to be a long night, and even then they would be working into the next 2 days discussing their plans. It had been a few months since the attempt by Kumo, but Naruto had actually taken the news the worst of all those involved with the incident. Kushina was not the average coddling mother many became with their first child. Especially knowing her own inability to truly protect Naruto would eventually lead to the boy needing to fend for himself. She had tried to break the news of him having his first kill gently, but it had been hard on the young boy to accept. Still, it was nothing compared to the blow of learning his mother was dying. The thought of losing her nearly broke the boy, but once again Kushina was not one for coddling her beloved son, no matter how much she loved him. He had little time to focus on the fact that his mother's inevitable death would be coming far sooner than either of them would like. Between Kushina herself pushing him to his limits in training and the nearly ever-present Kyra adding to it, the boy hardly got a rest. They ground him into the dirt and built him back up, seemingly caring little for his young age. Always pushing his limits but never pushing him too far beyond. While they worked tirelessly to prepare Naruto for the hardship he would face once Kushina inevitably did pass, Hideki took on another important job for the Uzumaki clan. Presently Kushina was meeting one of her older friends in the village. While most had always treated her with a bit of distance as a foreigner, only worsening with the truth of her Jinchuriki status and the attack becoming public somehow, Mikoto, like Minato, had cared little if at all for such things. The 2 women had been rivals as young girls, but things were very different from the 2 princesses attending the academy so long ago. Kushina's appearance was already beginning to suffer from her condition. Her skin was more pale, shadows clung to the circles under her eyes, and a clear sense of fatigue seemed to hang around her. In Makoto's case, long gone was the bold and fearless Uchiha princess, instead in her place was Makoto Uchiha, wife of Fugaku. Neither woman knew what had started the change. Maybe the betrothal to someone like Fugaku. Maybe it was the fact she had only bore daughters for the man, making him distant at best and violent at worst. Maybe it was the feeling that her eldest daughter seemed to hold her in resentment for being so weak at home. Maybe it was all this and plenty more of the many straws that built up on the poor woman's back, but she was nearly as much a shadow of her former self as Kushina was, and she wasn't even dying. He really has gotten bad, hasn't he? Kushina asked. The look in Makoto's eyes was answer enough, and after several beats of silence, Kushina realized it was all she was going to get. Has he been hurting the girls too? Kushina asked in a colder, more forceful voice, causing her friend to flinch. More out of shame than fear of Kushina's legendary wrath. Of course not. You think I would let him? Makoto asked, affronted by the very notion before she froze at the look in Kushina's eyes. Makoto, Itachi-chan graduated from the academy already and is a chunin. She looks like she can barely hold a conversation with others, and I don't just mean about the children her age. She's practically a ghost. Kind of like you. Kushina was biting hard in this conversation. Unsurprising, Makoto thought, as Kushina had always been outspoken on her thoughts of the Uchiha clan's ideas about Kunoichi and Fugaku in particular. She is a prodigy. Makoto defended weakly. Minato was a prodigy. Kaira-chan was broken and needed an outlet. Itachi-chan is a fucking knife with a pulse and pink eye. She's worse than Kaira was after Minato died. Lie to me but not to yourself. She scolded. Makoto grimaced at the light reprimand. It used to be Makoto always scolding Kushina for her reckless behavior in Konoha. Trying to teach her friend to act like a proper heiress and Kunoichi of an esteemed clan. Now look how the tables had turned. What am I supposed to do? Itachi doesn't even talk to me outside of meals anymore. At least Fugaku's only interest in Satsuki is as a bargaining chip, so he won't put her under the same stress and training as Itachi. The Uchiha matriarch whimpered. Both fell into silence as Kushina turned to look outside at the two children playing. Makoto did at least seem set on trying to shield her youngest from her husband better than she had her eldest. The girl was rarely more than a few meters from her mother at all times. Similarly, Naruto was rarely very far from Kushina, but for literally the opposite reason. In the last few months the boy had become nearly as obsessive in her protection as Kaira had in her protection of him. Even now while playing with his new and arguably first friend, under the gaze of Kaira, Naruto repeatedly looked over to the Uzumaki head house to try and check on Kushina. Fugaku just wants to use Satsuki as a political marriage piece? Kushina asked in mild surprise. If we had even one son, he would go the route of royals, but we don't thankfully. I actually hate the idea of her marrying another Uchiha just to please her father. Makoto frowned. Of all the Uchiha households only 7 had boys that would be considered marrying age for Makoto's taste, but she also knew that these families were all those who hadn't awakened the Sharingan in generations, and so by the elders and Fugaku's opinion, were actually lower than outsiders, with even the slightest of natural abilities to pass on. So he makes Itachi a weapon and Satsuki a broodmare. Your husband always impresses me. Who is he planning for her future? Kushina asked with a scoff. She turned her head from the window to look at Makoto when there was silence for a time. I think he plans to eventually marry her to Shisui. Makoto finally said. You're kidding. Why not marry Itachi to Shisui? They are closer in age at least. Kushina said. Yes, but Itachi and Shisui get along very well. Fugaku wouldn't be able to control them if they formed an actually effective coupling. Makoto pointed out with surprising heat in her tone. Still, Satsuki is 4, Shisui is nearly 19. That's the age gap of civilian nobles, not shinobi. He'd be more likely to be killed before they could even have a ceremony, let alone start having children. I know. I think he plans on announcing it soon though. Likely for Satsuki's 5th birthday he'll proclaim her betrothal to one of the Uchiha geniuses. Since only one of them is a boy, Makoto sounded defeated once more. So soon? Kushina mumbled at the thought, looking back out at the smiling girl playing with her little boy. The thought of that girl ending up just like her friend stirred something in her. What about outside the Uchiha? Kushina asked. Outside the Uchiha? Makoto slowly responded as if the thought itself might as well have been. If she married an outsider and brought them into the clan, it would be even worse. Fugaku would want to ensure she could pass on the Sharingan by making her activate it as soon as possible for proof. He'd break her trying if it failed. Makoto said. No, I mean another clan heir. Satsuki is the second child in addition to being a girl. There is no denying that Fugaku would marry her off to someone of power, maybe even outside the village, even if Shisui refuses. However, what if she married into another clan? Then she would be safe from his pull, right? She argued. What clan would he allow her to marry into? The Uchiha are a royal clan like the Senju and Uzumaki. However, Makoto stopped talking as her mind had come to the realization about what Kushina was talking about. Her eyes followed hers, and the two mothers looked through the window. Looking outside, she saw Naruto and Satsuki giggling like mad, while Kyra picked some grass out of her silvery hair. The pair of children were holding each other's hands and racing away from the kunoichi as she pretended to give an outraged chase. The mothers smiled watching this interaction before Makoto turned her head towards her sickly friend. "You'd really agree to that?" Makoto asked in wonder. "For Satsuki and Naruto, yes. Let them grow up together as best friends and eventually wed, they'll be good for one another. Plus Naruto will need more people he loves and trusts soon. I have some balance to that hopefully coming with Uncle Toby's return, but the more the merrier as they always say. Plus they're cute on their own. Imagine their kid being a mixture of the two." Kushina was giggling at the end, bringing a small smile to Makoto's face. Noticing the third Hokage with Hideki and a pair of red heads heading up the path from the compound's gate, Kushina smiled. "Sadly I think you and Satsuki-chan best head out, Makoto. I have some company. Come by tomorrow and we'll sign some documents. We can even have Satsuki start joining Naruto with training." The Redeed suggested as she stood. "Of course. I'll see you tomorrow. Maybe I can get a nap in before Fugaku returns and I still have to convince him to go along with your betrothal idea," Makoto said. The pair briefly met and introduced themselves to the group coming in before Makoto left to fetch Satsuki and tell the other two they would be needed up in the main house. As she left she was already running through plans on how to manipulate Fugaku into agreeing to the betrothal. The lifeline her closest friend had tossed for her daughter's future was not one she was about to let slip through her fingers. While Makoto was leaving with Satsuki, Kushina was greeting the visitors to her home. She was actually quite a bit excited as she greeted them too. Naruto noticed the happy demeanor his mother had with the newcomers as he and Kyra approached. The Silver Edit insisted on carrying him on the way back up to the house. She'd been clingy toward him ever since she got back from her mission. He knew it was because she hadn't been there when he and his mom were attacked, but his mother said Kyra had a habit of blaming herself for her loved one's troubles. It was another thing he had to worry about, he supposed. Much like his mother pushing herself too hard while healing. When his mother had mentioned earlier he would begin training harder and more often, he had been happy rather than worried. He needed to be strong to protect both of them and his new friend Satsuki, and his uncle Tabi too. As Kyra and Naruto finally reached the group and Kyra let the little boy down, Naruto's interest initially went to the old man of the group. He roughly knew who he was. His mother had always told him to treat him with respect. He was the Hokage after all. That being said, his mother didn't always live exactly how she told her son to. She usually just referred to him as the old man or Gramps. The Hokage never got mad at that though, for some reason. After that though his interest had been taken by the two women of the group. More properly, the woman and small girl. Both had red hair like his mother and him, though theirs was differently shaded with the mother's a deep red almost purple even, and the girl's even more crimson than his mom's. "Naruto, I want you to meet some important people that will be living with us. They just arrived in Konoha with uncle, so treat them well alright," Kushina said as she pulled him close to her and rubbed his head gently. He simply nodded to her as he tried to gaze upon the girl's eyes. He couldn't get a good look at her at first though. She seemed frightened or shy and had hid back behind the woman's leg, only peeking out slightly. Only when she locked eyes with him did he notice her eyes were a bright red nearly matching her hair and Kyra's hidden eye. "Well, how about I do introductions?" Hideki suggested. "This is Taka Uzumaki and Karen Uzumaki. For you two, this is Kushina and Naruto Uzumaki. Hello Karen, oh my. You have the prettiest looking eyes," Kushina said with a friendly tone, trying to get the shy girl to come out a bit. The blush that sprung up on the girl's face tied the color of her eyes and hair together almost perfectly. Now Karen. Say hello to Kushina-sama and Naruto-sama," Taka said, guiding the girl from behind her. "Hi," Karen said while bowing slightly. "You don't need to worry about that stuffy business right now Karen. Just look at it as a family reunion," Kushina soothed, causing the girl to nod before returning to her mother's side. "We should talk inside. Naruto, go show Karen to the spare rooms I had you help me clean up earlier," Kushina ordered. "Okay," Naruto said as he stepped away from the adults. Karen looked up to her mother for instructions who gave a smile and nodded. Karen smiled back and then followed after Naruto. With the children heading away, Kushina and Hideki led the others into her office where they all sat down to begin what was likely to be a bit of a long conversation. The talks were pretty dry, mostly just voicing what all of them needed to hear. Taka was the last of the branch of the Uzumaki family dedicated to its more religious practices and traditions. Among them being the maintenance of the Uzumaki shrines that once dotted Oyuzu Island. Konoha had one of its own too, which would become Taka and in time Karen's responsibility. They also confirmed Taka's support of Kushina as remaining clan head and Naruto becoming the heir. All she had needed to know was that Kushina could create the adamantine chains, which is proof enough that she was part of the main family. While her branch possessed the ability to create similar chains, they were not as unique as those of the main branch. Either way, with that business out of the way, Taka and Karen would be welcomed as citizens of Konoha and would hold the privileges of being members of the Uzumaki clan. They moved on to less official topics and more into simple conversation. "So the doctors are certain then?" Taka asked. "I'm afraid so, they aren't certain how long I have left exactly, but either way a couple years won't matter much in the end." "So I know it's a lot to ask," but Kushina sounded defeated. No. Of course anything you or Naruto-kun need. Just wish there was more time. We just found more family and already it will only last a few years at best." Taka's voice was depressed. The room slipped into a brief silence as both men refrained from interrupting the women. Both had been young girls during the fall of Uzumaki. They had been alone but had found someone to love and even brought children into the world, only to lose that loved one and be alone once more now with the weight of a child to care for. Now finally being reunited with family, it seemed like cruel humor to know one of them would be dying soon. "Abibito-kun," Sarutobi's voice cut into the silence. "Were you able to get a hold of Tsunade? The head of the hospital said that if there is a chance, it lies with her. Maybe she could repair her chakra system and stop the what were they called Kushina? Micro-breaches. Sounds like some made-up crap, but essentially my chakra network was already damaged and very slowly healing. Whatever genjutsu they tried to use on me, I strained my network too much while breaking out of it. My body is essentially burning itself from the inside out. The only reason I'm not bedridden right now according to the doc is because I'm Uzumaki and taking enough pain meds to dope up a horse." Kushina explained. "I don't think it matters in the end. I tried to get her to return, but he sighed and rubbed his face to try and fight back the weight of stress bearing down on him." "But?" Taka asked. "I believe her exact words were, 'What's one more shinobi life to Konoha? Why should it be my responsibility?'" Hideki looked disgusted with the Sannin. Taka looked shocked at such words from the last senju, while Sarutobi just looked sad and Kushina unmoved. "I could have told you that already, uncle. You needn't waste your time on her," Kushina said, though there seemed to be unspoken words only the two of them understood. "Then I'm afraid we're lost. Without Tsunade herself to heal you, Kushina, all I can do is to try and help you stay comfortable when the time comes," Sarutobi said sadly. "Has anyone told Naruto?" Hideki asked. "No, I want to wait for a while to tell him. He's already smothering me with care and affection." She chuckled bitterly. This wasn't how things were ever supposed to go. The group slipped back into silence as Kushina fought to regain her control of her emotions. It just seemed like the gods themselves were against her family at times. Nearby, slipping past a confused Karen, Naruto fought back his own tears as he picked up speed and began running away from the main house of the tiny Uzumaki compound. He bit his tongue to keep from crying out hard enough that he could taste the coppery flavor of his blood. Still he needed to be alone for now, away from Karen and the house and everything else. His mother was dying and this Tsunade woman could have saved her if she would just come back to Konoha. At the moment, the young boy was too caught up in the distress at the thought of losing his mother. However, deep inside he securely locked onto the knowledge that Tsunade Senju could have saved his beloved mother but simply chose not to. Back in the office, the adults had begun to enjoy a small bottle of sake between them. Hideki had attempted 3 different times to start a conversation on something more pleasant, even trying to turn the meeting into a small welcoming party for Taka. Sadly the mood was soured and soon they returned to the subject. "I'm not that upset at her, uncle," Kushina said. "I know of her phobia and we all know how the Senju were hunted down like the Uzumaki were. Still, Uzumaki blood flows through her veins even if she's not part of the clan." He began. "It doesn't work like that. You know that. You've practically been a part of the clan for as long as I have, blood or not," Kushina replied in a soft chiding tone. "Plus it doesn't matter. I was expected to die within the decade from the extraction anyway. The fact I got that long was a miracle. The amount of time I had was short already. She could prolong my life, but I've been dying for a while." But that Hideki slumped into his chair. He was a serious man on most occasions, but seeing the girl he had largely raised himself so accepting of her death killed something inside of him. He felt cold, as if ice was settling into his stomach. "I hate this," he finally whispered. "I know, but it's life. You know it only gets harder from here," she said with a smile causing tears to finally well in the man's eyes before he cleared his throat and downed the rest of his drink. "So be it," he grumbled. By the next day Naruto had recollected himself and was doing his best to pretend he hadn't heard a thing from the night before. He had also convinced Karen to promise not to tell that he had been eavesdropping. Breakfast was a bit more crowded than what Naruto was accustomed to. Hideki and Taka left to take care of some things, probably getting her and Karen's paperwork finalized. Naruto and Karen instead were told they would be starting their new training with Kushina and Kyra later in the afternoon after Makoto and Satsuki came over once again. This had Karen nearly bouncing off the walls in excitement. It was hard to picture the shy girl from the day before with how Karen was, practically running in place at being trained to be a real kunoichi. They didn't have to wait long. Or at least it didn't feel that long while being distracted by Kyra. When Makoto showed up, she and Kushina slipped into Kushina's office to resolve something, while Kyra got the three children started on basic stretches and calisthenics. Once they had finished, Kyra had left them to catch their breath while she went to fetch some water, figuring they would need them as they worked. "I can't wait to be a kunoichi like Kyra-san and your mom, Naruto-sama," Karen said with a grin between gasps of breath. "Yeah, I wanna be like my big sister too. She's a kunoichi too," Satsuki explained to Karen, who nodded with a smile. "My mom isn't a kunoichi anymore," Naruto said roughly, surprising both girls. Karen knew something had happened when he had eavesdropped on the adults the night prior, but wasn't sure what. Both girls had preferred the happy and friendly boy from the day before to the somber boy giving fake smiles all morning. "Well, yeah, she has to take care of you. Just like our moms," Karen said with a soft tone. "No, that's not why," he said quietly. "What do you mean?" Satsuki asked. This was very unlike the Naruto she had become friends with the day before. "I listened to my mom and Karen's mom and Uncle Tabi and the Hokage talking last night. They said my mom was sick and that she is dying." He came clean with clenched fists, trying to keep the tears in his eyes from running down his cheeks. "What? But she's fine," Karen contested. "You didn't know her before yesterday. She's different. She's tired or hurting or something. Plus I heard her say it," Naruto said. "Well, maybe the doctors can do something, right?" Satsuki offered, but frowned as the boy slid down against the tree behind him and started shaking his head while wiping at his eyes. "No," he said in a cracked voice. "Uncle Tabi went to get some lady named Tsunade. She's the only one that could help, but she won't even try because she hates Konoha or something," Naruto whimpered. Both girls awkwardly rubbed the boy's arms as they sat down beside him. They both kept glancing at one another for a clue of what to say to make their new friend feel better, but what can you say to something like that? "Everything will be alright" felt like a lie, so they just kept quiet and rubbed his shoulders and arms gently to comfort him. "You know, Naruto, my mother died when I was very little too. Same with my father too," a voice said, causing all three children to jolt slightly in surprise. Iris stood over them, face hidden by a mask, but a comforting sense emanating from her somehow. She handed them each a bottle of water and even pulled a small towel from around her neck to hand to Naruto to dry his tears before sitting down with them. "Really?" Naruto asked. "Yeah. I remember how sad and alone I was, but you know something odd?" she asked. The boy and both girls seemed to be giving her their undivided attention. "At the time I felt all alone and couldn't help but want to cry all the time. Until I opened my eyes and realized something." She reached over and pulled the smaller boy into her lap, laying her chin on his head. "I wasn't really alone at all. I didn't have my parents anymore, but I had my friends and your mom, and eventually I had you and Karen and Satsuki. So even without my parents I still had all sorts of people to love, you see," she said quietly before kissing the top of his head. "But I don't want her to go, Kyra," Naruto whimpered as he turned and pressed his face into the crook of her neck. "I know, I wish I could do something so she wouldn't leave. You know she has acted like my own mom at times," Kyra said with a small chuckle, remembering the times Kushina had mothered her. "What do I do?" the boy asked. That's a good question. Well, there is really only one thing you can do. You have to get strong so you can protect your loved ones as best you can and love them with all you have while they are with you. That's all you can do," she said. The group was silent as Naruto's quiet crying slowly died away. Kyra continued to hold the boy in her arms and kiss his head as he recollected himself. "We'll get stronger to help you too, Naruto-kun," Satsuki said, causing Kyra to glance at the Uchiha briefly. "I'll train you to become the best shinobi you can be, Naruto." "Alright," Kyra insisted. "I guess," he said. Pulling away from Kyra, he looked her eye to eye, though they were puffy and swollen from crying. "I just don't know if I wanna even see the future if mom won't be there. Strong or not, Yakno." Kyra sighed at that. She nodded too. It was a fair point, especially for a child like Naruto who was so devoted to his mother. "Your mom will always be with you, kiddo. Plus it would still be some time before she passes on, so spend as much time with her as you can, okay?" Kyra reassured before pulling him tightly in for another hug and several more pecks on the red mess he called hair. Chapter 2 On the Shoulders of a Child. Training Ground 19. Konoha. Naruto slid on his knees under the kick of his teacher before transitioning into a roll to get past a woman who had a much longer reach than he did. Once clear, he had to immediately dive backwards to avoid the rampant practice sword she was using in this exercise. She would have probably kept the pressure on him if another body hadn't placed themselves in the way of the attack, using their own practice sword to block the upcoming strike. Naruto spared a glance at his ally. Kari Ikazuchi was his age and along with one other, had been sent as part of the reparations within the last 2 years. Both girls were from relatively important clans with well-known abilities in Kumo, while neither girl was in the line for succession of those clans themselves. Along with them had come a selection of their clan's jutsu and blade techniques. The intention being that they would eventually marry Konoha boys and begin branches of their clans within Konoha. Similar to what had once been intended for Kushina though for different reasons, being as the Uzumaki clan and Konoha had been allies. Naruto had known quite a bit about Kari and Samui before they even came to Konoha, and his mother had made it clear to him about the situation and that he was to try and befriend them. Saying she had been just like them at one point. While Naruto doubted that he understood when his mother told him that the girls had nothing to do with what had happened that night when his mother had been hurt, that led him to now. Kipping back up to his feet, he launched a pair of dull training kunai out at their second opponent as he came in for Kari's back, causing him to stop and deflect them before Naruto's second ally Samui was upon him. Samui Aomoyasu was Kari's opposite in nearly every way. A year older than himself and Kari, her practice sword bounced off of their trainers before it stabbed in with speed most girls her age couldn't perform at. Naruto was about to jump back in to help the girls when his third opponent kicked his third ally in her chest, sending her tumbling end over end toward him on the ground. With little other choice, Naruto caught Karen and braced both of them against a tree to stop her momentum. "Thanks." His cousin bit out as she grimaced from the pain in her chest caused by the kick from their third trainer. "Yeah, are you okay or do you need a second?" Naruto asked her as he shifted around and stood in front to provide her with cover. "I'm fine, they're all holding back a lot." She groaned as she got to her feet and pulled out a practice kunai and filled her left hand with dulled shuriken. "Maybe, but Kaira-chan, Height-san and Yugao-san are all jonins, and strong ones too. If they didn't hold back so much against the four of us we'd all be dead and in a couple of seconds too," Naruto said as he braced himself for the silver-haired teenager that was stalking toward them like the wolf her clan was so often compared to. "She's coming, get ready," Karen warned as she sensed the shift in their teacher's chakra. Naruto didn't even get a chance to respond as he was trying to catch the foot lashing out toward him. It briefly lifted him off the ground, but he kept the foot locked in the crook of his arm. He grinned for only a split second before the leg was yanked forward and himself along with it. Slammed into the dirt. Naruto could only wheeze as the air was forced from his lungs. A split second later he watched Karen catch the other foot from Kaira, though not with her hands, instead she caught it square in the chest once again. Unlike earlier when she flipped backwards from the force of the blow, there was no one but a tree to catch her. Naruto tried to roll out from under Kaira, but before he could she snatched him by his wrists and twisted them behind his back before giggling as she watched the boy squirm underneath her grip. "You really should yield, Naru-kun. I win," Kaira said in a sing-song tone as Naruto huffed into the dirt. "Whatever. You win," Naruto bit out, though the remaining fight drained out of him as he watched similar situations with his other allies. The golden-eyed spitfire that was Kari squirmed and twisted under Yugao's feet while the perplet simply gave her an exasperated look. Samui simply stared back at Naruto with her usual cool and aloof expression, just as unhappy with hate, laughing and coughing while sitting on top of her. It was humiliating, but it could be worse. Karen stumbled back into the clearing, a bloody nose and split lip and cracked glasses, only adding to the disheveled the 7-year-old had. The group all stilled as she stumbled past them, dazed by the blow from Kaira. Maybe we overdid it a bit with you kids," Kaira said while scratching at her masked cheek. The three children on the ground simply glared up at her. A little while later, and after checking up on Karen to make sure there was no serious damage to her head, the group had sat around the training ground with some bentos for lunch as they chatted about what Naruto and the girls needed to work on. The three jonin had seemed pretty happy with their overall abilities. Kaira even said they were far better than most 6-year-olds had any right of being, though the compliments and praise were quickly followed by admonishments. Naruto's brief instance of letting himself slip into thought got quite a bit of emphasis from Kaira as she dressed him down. As did him catching her foot despite knowing she was physically stronger than he was. It seemed fine at the time. Naruto huffed out with a bit of a blush on his face. "Oh yeah? When? How about when I was standing on you? Was that when it was fine?" Kaira asked hotly. She and his mother shared that characteristic. They seemed to baby him in most things, but training or any kind of lessons they became harsh taskmasters and didn't hesitate with speaking down to him to drive the lesson home with a bit of embarrassment. Ashino often told them and Karen both that Shame was one of the best teachers available to shinobi. That in pain. "I could have stabbed your leg," Naruto argued. Kaira frowned at him from behind her mask while the others remained silent. "And if I was an enemy the moment you were dazed and catching your breath, I could have stabbed your throat. Your enemies won't give you time to regain your bearings, Naruto. Never give them the chance to have you at their mercy," she explained before turning to begin explaining to Karen what the girls should have done when Naruto caught their teacher's foot. Naruto listened and watched as the small session continued on. They had made a habit ever since Kushina had made it known she wanted Naruto to befriend the two girls from Cloud. Naruto and his group of friends along with Kyra and Carrie and Samui's caretakers, Yugao and Hade, would gather together and train. Sadly, Satsuki couldn't come today as her father had finally decided to teach her the coming-of-age jutsu for the Uchiha. She'd been busy with that for 2 days in a row now, and from what he overheard between Itachi and Kyra, Satsuki had been working at it until she collapsed both days. No doubt she was back on that dock today running herself ragged. Naruto knew better than to interrupt her training to check on her though. He'd just have to catch up with her when she finally got it down. Still, Satsuki was only one member of their group. Naruto himself had steadily pushed himself to become the most advanced potential shinobi of his generation, as far as the conversations that his mother and Uncle Tabi had seemed to say when they thought Naruto was asleep and they were catching up in the kitchen. His training with the adamantine chains of his family had continued, but more and more other shinobi skills were being drilled into his head. Salty more and more it was Kyra and others besides his mother that were the ones doing the drilling. Eren had proven she too could use the chakra chains of their clan, though they lacked the sealing abilities of his own and his mother's chains. She had also unlocked another ability though, one that Naruto knew would lead to her becoming a highly skilled kunoichi. Karen was arguably one of the best censors in the village, and she was not even graduating from the academy yet. According to their mothers it was the mind's eye of Kagura. Naruto himself wasn't 100% on its abilities, but sometimes Karen could tell him where someone was from almost the other side of the village, so he knew it was really useful. The next member of their little clique of friends was Carrie. The same age as himself and Satsuki. Naruto hoped the three of them would be on a team and that Samui and Karen would be on one together as well. He wasn't exceptionally fond of the others in the village. They mostly treated his mother with cordial respect or like royalty, but Karen had told him she could tell most of them only cared about his family's status and money, and his mother had sadly confirmed that. Carrie was different though. Naruto wasn't sure if it was because she was a foreigner like his mom and Karen were, but she didn't care about his status or wealth in the slightest. In fact, she had tried to pick a fight with him when they first met before they became friends. Overall, the deed reminded him a lot of his mom before she became sick. She was stubborn and reckless, but also really protective of her friends. Karen had told him one day she had gone to the market with her mother and was separated for a bit at one of the stalls when a couple of clanless kids tried to pick on her for being stuck up and an outsider. Carrie had only been their friend for a couple months, but was throwing punches at the surprised kids before they even noticed she'd been passing by. Since then Karen and Carrie had been good friends and Naruto had been very happy someone protected his clanswoman. He wouldn't tolerate anyone treating anybody in his family poorly. No matter who they were or what reason they had. The last member of their little group today was Samui. Unlike Carrie who had dark skin, gold eyes, and dark red hair with a fiery temper to match her usual scowl, Samui was pale, blue-eyed, blonde-haired, and extremely calm, aloof, and honestly hard to read for most people, Naruto included. Despite that, whenever she smiled Naruto knew it was a true smile, and she wasn't pretending with her feelings one way or another. Just like Carrie, she didn't care at all about Naruto's clan status or his family's money. She hadn't jumped in to protect Karen from bullies or anything, but she had a way of making even some adults feel stupid when she spoke to them that always brought a grin to Naruto's face. I wish Satsuki was here. It's not the same when one of us is missing. Karen said in a pout as she picked at her rice. Maybe, but you know how much she has wanted her dad to teach her something. He's teaching her the Uchiha specialty with fire too. Naruto explained as he swallowed a dumpling. Kyra rolled her eye at the boy as she noticed the line of sauce at the corner of his mouth and reached over to clean it up, getting the blushing boy to swat at her hand while the rest of the group giggled. Why don't you slow down and actually enjoy your meal, Naruto? Your mom. Kyra started only for the boy to glare at her. They both knew that Kushina didn't make food for the household anymore. That had fallen to another newer member to Naruto's life. Evidently a former kunoichi from Kyra's team who had spent several years recovering from a career-ending injury. The group fell back into silence. They knew Naruto's mother was a sensitive subject. Kyra especially grew worried when it concerned her role model. Naruto still possessed some of the friendliness and loving personality that his loved ones adored so much, but over time things had diluted that with a wary and pessimistic outlook on much of life. He no longer trusted or loved so freely as he did as the happy little boy he had been. He was growing very skilled at identifying the true intentions of those around him even without Karen's help, and it soured his belief in the village at large. Not enough to hate the people of Konoha. After all, not all of them were like that, but he was disappointed to learn much of the village didn't actually care much for his family, no matter what they did for them. Saying their goodbyes after eating, Naruto and Kyra made their way back to the Uzumaki compound. Karen had planned on going with Carrie and Samui to shop for a while, but Naruto had more lessons with his mother back at home, so couldn't join the rest of his friends. The girls had been led along by Hade and Yugao. They decided to swing by the Uchiha compound and check with Mikoto to see how Satsuki was doing before heading off to the market district. Well they, like Naruto, knew better than to disturb the girl's training to check on her mother would suffice for an update. Instead of the expected answer that Satsuki was still down at the Uchiha dock training herself into the dirt, Mikoto told them to wait a little bit and the girl would be out of the shower and happy to join them for their little shopping trip. A few moments later and the group was on the move again, catching up as they walked with Satsuki excitedly explaining about how quickly she had gotten the grand fireball jutsu down. She had been a bit embarrassed about the fact that she had exhausted herself to the point that she didn't wake up till noon the next day though, and the group of children happily moved along after giggling about how stubborn she was. Konoha's market was the largest of any of the hidden villages, rivaling some merchant towns in size, which led to a portion of Konoha's power when it came to war with other lands. The crowds were thick, and members of the military police and even Anbu watched from their places around the market squares, as well as from rooftops. The goods offered depended as much on the politics of the day as supply and demand. It only made sense that should Konoha be at war with Iwa, for instance, then the quarried stone and gems that were among some of the land of Earth's primary exports would be nearly impossible to get. Currently though the opposite was true, especially for goods from Cloud. On top of Kari and Samui being taken to make clans in Konoha, Kumo was now obligated to lower taxes on all trade, leading to an advantage for Fire Country goods heading there and Lighting Country goods bound for Konoha. Lighting Country gold and silver as well as other metals filled some of Konoha's market. Kari already sported a pair of small gold earrings from her homeland, but she and the others were happy to look at all the other items as well. Pei and Yugao were browsing as well as they watched over the girls, though they were less interested in the small knickknacks and jewelry and more interested in the other metal items sold. Kumo, now with the destruction of Uzushio, had become the second largest exporter of chakra-infused metals and blades. Though the gap remained large as Iron Country exported almost nothing else other than metals, while Kumo could compensate with a selection of other goods like any of the five powers. The group continued to largely mill about in the market for a few hours. Karen had spent her allotted money on a simply designed gold bangle for her mother, while the other girls had largely just browsed. It wasn't long after buying the bracelet though that she could sense something that had her clutching at Samui's shoulder for balance, and the whole group worried. Karen's sensory ability was already extremely advanced for her age, however it was still very difficult to control. As it was, she had no real ability to shut her power off except when she slept. In time she had mostly grown used to it, normally being in effect. Almost like a sixth sense surrounding her. Her training with it had made her able to distinguish more specific targets at great ranges already, but surrounding her, she could feel almost everything from those nearby. That was how she had first felt the girl tucked into the back of the alley, trying her best to scrub a shirt pulled from the garbage clean. At this close Karen felt like she already knew the girl. Her chakra had a strength to it that most not born of clans lacked, despite that she seemed filled with nothing but sadness, fear, guilt, and a sense of longing. It reminded her of Naruto but far less controlled and managed. Far more sharp and raw too. Karen? Yugao asked the girl, worried about why she seemed so bothered suddenly. Someone needs help in that alley, sensei. She said quickly, pointing down the block to where the girl was at, completely unaware of their existence. Yugao and Hade exchanged looks before the purple motion for him to stay with the girls. Most of him had started to take on worried expressions along with Karen. The Anbu agent made her way up the road casually, but her fellow shinobi could recognize the heightened tension she was feeling and looked ready to jump in to help with whatever was going on. Slowly she rounded the corner and paused at the side in front of her. It was a tiny wisp of a girl. She was cute but covered in dirt with tangled hair and a few small scrapes and bruises. Yugao didn't want to guess the last time the kid had eaten anything was. Slowly, while making enough noise not to sneak up on the girl, but not so much as to scare her, Yugao made her way down the alleyway. The girl at least didn't appear to have been beaten by anyone. Her bruises looked more from bad falls and the general clumsiness of an unsupervised child than anything. It wasn't long before she had turned to regard Yugao as she approached with a hint of worry. Yugao actually recognized the girl when she got close enough to see her better in the evening light. Pink hair, green eyes, Sakura Haruno. Yugao had been one of the Anbu to support the police response to the Haruno home roughly a year prior, when Sakura had accidentally released a burst of chakra. Her younger twin brother had similar issues, however the chakra bursts he typically released were widespread and unfocused, leading to at worst some bruising or broken bones and minor damage to objects. Sakura, they had come to realize, had restrained her chakra so finely for so long after seeing the scoldings her brother got that the sharp, precise burst that eventually released was explosive enough to nearly kill the girl and demolish a load-bearing wall in her family kitchen. Yugao hadn't had a lot of interaction with the case following that. She knew that Sakura's mother had been killed, but being as Yugao had her own primary directive with raising Kari and Samui, she didn't really bother to involve herself in things handled normally by the police. It seemed that had been the wrong decision. Sakura looked like she had been living on the street for weeks if not longer. In Konoha that was practically unheard of. Especially with a child with as much potential as this one. Controlling her chakra to an extent that it could cause that much damage from a simple slip was literally unheard of outside of someone like Tsunade's Senju. That kind of chakra control had to be innate to the person and trained for years. Again Sasakura had unknowingly done just that. She couldn't remain on the street. Yugao wasn't a true sensor, especially not to the level of Karen, but even she could feel the gradual building of chakra within the girl's tiny form. She was clearly afraid of another incident like before happening again and had tamped down even harder. She might as well be a time bomb without proper training. At least the girl only seemed slightly wary of her and not outright frightened. That was a good sign. Still this needed to go to the Hokage. Making a clone to explain things to Hayate and have him take the girls home, she began coaxing Sakura toward her to take her in. Kurama compound outskirts, Konoha. After dropping Naruto off with his mother and her former teammate, Kyra had to head up to the Kurama compound to meet with Jiraiya and lend a hand with placing a seal for the clan's heiress. Evidently her bloodline and natural talent with ninjutsu had grown to become a threat both to herself and others, and she had accidentally taken the lives of both her parents. Kyra was accompanying the man on this mission because she was one of the few outside the Uzumakis, the Hokage, and Jiraiya himself that had a decent level of skill and experience working with seals. It went unsaid that Kyra would likely end up being the one to get the responsibility of maintenance for young Yakumo's seal when the time came for her to begin her shinobi training. To the Silverette's dismay, they would not be the only ones going. The girl's tutor and current caretaker, being that Yakumo had all but been disowned following the incident with her parents, Kurina Yuhi would also be there. The two Kunoichi hadn't gotten along since they were children. Kyra rarely spoke of the issue, but when she did she simply claimed Kurenai was childish and envious as well as far too proud of her own accomplishments. Kurenai's opinion of Kyra wasn't very different. She'd always considered the prodigy to be stuck up and condescending, and a handful of attempts to befriend her as children had left a sour taste in Kurenai's mouth at the harsh and rude way Kyra had responded. Despite their distaste of one another, both were at least professional enough to hold off on their dislike for one another until after they had completed the sealing. At the moment Kyra hovered over Jiraiya's shoulder as he worked to inscribe the seal on the sleeping girl's back. Kurenai similarly hovered around the girl's bed though while Kyra was trying to learn the seal itself as it was applied Kurenai was more focused on the welfare of her young charge. Ikumo was still just a child and having lost her parents and been thrown out of her family, coupled with the fear of her abilities manifesting a secondary personality that acted and appeared like a monster to her, she needed someone to care for her. Overall the process was quick and easy. With Yakumo sedated as she was they had no resistance to the seal, and Jiraiya could move at near to his normal speed in inscription with Kyra's Sharingan, copying both the alterations in chakra and hand movements made by the seal master. That should about do it. All that's left is to wake her up and make sure everything is running smoothly, but I'm sure everything is as it should be. Jiraiya said as he stood up. I've got the seal memorized. I'll be able to maintain it with no issue, Lord Jiraiya. Kyra reported. Great, well then I'll collect all my materials and we can head up to report to sensei. Jiraiya began cleaning and putting away his tools, while Kurenai seemed to check Yakumo over before covering her with a blanket and making sure she was comfortable. I appreciate this, Lord Jiraiya. Are you sure that Yakumo will be able to become a shinobi? Even with the seal active I mean. Kurenai asked him, pointedly ignoring Kyra, not that the Silverette really cared. Of course. I designed it myself after all, based on some seals I learned a long time ago to help those with bloodline issues manage them. I had to tweak it of course. This situation is a bit odd. Though I think Kyra-chan probably could have handled it or even Kushina despite everything. His voice tapered off quietly toward the end. You really think Kyra could have? Maybe you could teach me how to maintain the seal, it might Kurenai began. Kyra however was having none of Kurenai's attitude toward her today. You already made an attempt to seal the girl, remember? Then she burned up her parents and house. Leave this to people with talent in the art. Kyra bit out as she pulled out a book and began reading it. One of Jiraiya's works of course. Ever since she borrowed a copy from Minato's house when she was a new gen and she'd grown attached to them. Kurenai's eyes widened as she turned fully to glare at Kyra. The Silverette didn't even look up from her reading as Jiraiya hung his head at the coming fight. He was a fan of sexy girls like Kyra and Kurenai fighting, but usually only in lingerie or bathing suits while rolling around in a pool or some mud. The tongue lashing that he knew was coming would do nothing but work on his frayed nerves. You don't know what you're talking about. Plus what would you know about our copycat? Kurenai finally said with a scoff. I mean you have had issues in the past both with me and Itachi-chan. When it came to Genjutsu trials during inspection, I wouldn't put it past you to do something to handicap more competition for your title. Kyra said coolly while flipping a page. Jiraiya opened his mouth to reprimand Kyra about that being uncalled for, but Kurenai beat him to it as her face turned scarlet in anger. You're one to talk about sabotage. If you couldn't be with poor Obito, nobody could, right? And when you realized that even when he was dead you never stacked up to sweet Rin. Right, friend killer Kyra? Kurenai hissed out. Watch your mouth, bitch. Kyra hissed back, one steely gray eye piercing one of her least favorite comrades. Her book snapped shut and she slid it back into her vest. That's enough. Jiraiya barked, drawing both women up short. Any friendly demeanor he had early was long since gone. Kyra immediately felt bad knowing the man was dealing with plenty of issues at the moment and didn't need her adding to it. Kurenai on the other hand was simply ashamed for having lost herself in a pointless argument. Both women had been throwing out practical nonsense after all. Everyone knew Kyra adored both her teammates in their own ways. Everyone also knew Kurenai had actually offered to help Itachi Uchiha with her Genjutsu training before Fugaku had sent her packing and that she saw Yakumo as a younger sister and would never do something to harm her knowingly. I'll be making note of this in my report. Kyra, go back to the compound and Kurenai look after your charge, no doubt she'll be placed under your care since she's been practically removed from her clan. I can't believe the two of you. The Sannin scolded as he sealed the last of his supplies away and followed Kyra out. After a final look of disappointment sent her way, Jiraiya flickered away toward the Hokage Tower while Kyra slowly meandered back to the Uzumaki compound. Uzumaki compound main house. Konoha, Naruto and Kushina sat working on a set of financial reports for some of the Uzumaki-backed businesses along Fire Country's coastline. Most were rather small-scale fishing enterprises, but a few were larger businesses like Niji Sakana, a medical research company that focused on engineering supplements and medicine from marine animals, mostly fish. I think that's about enough finance study for today, don't you think, kiddo? Kushina asked with a smile. Naruto heaved a relieved sigh as he nodded, getting the woman to laugh at the sight before grimacing slightly. Naruto watched as his mother gently rubbed her throat and stretched. She had become more sickly as time progressed. They even had a friend of the family besides Kyra living with them now to do most of the household work and care for Kushina. She could do it still, but she grew fatigued so much more quickly now than she used to and seemed to always be in pain. Hiding his frown as he began to retrieve his sealing supplies, Naruto was a bit surprised when Kushina stopped him and motioned for him to follow her. Confused by the change in their usual routine, Naruto followed his mother as she led him back through the house to one of the sitting rooms. They passed by Rin, who flashed them a small smile before she returned to making dinner for the Uzumakis and herself. She was a beautiful and kind woman, Naruto even considered her the best to help his mom out with things. Ever since she'd moved in, he noticed his mother had been a bit happier and had more energy since she was using less on housework. Not to mention evidently Rin was a former medic ninja Atlas in training to be one. She couldn't do field work, but she could still handle medical jutsu. Naruto, you can chat with Rin-chan later, there's something we need to talk about. Naruto sped up to catch up with Kushina waiting at the door. As he passed her into the next hallway, he missed the sad looks Rin and Kushina shared as the younger girl tried her best to reassure the Uzumaki matriarch. The pair of redeeds made their way finally to a comfortable sitting room. The main house was pretty sizable. This specific room was Naruto and Kushina's favorite for just taking some time to relax. Large windows overlooking the path out to the mask shrine in Karen and Taka's house, as well as the small stream that separated the two sections of the compound. The two of them sat silently for a bit, the boy glancing at his mother repeatedly as she just stared at him with a sad look. As time passed, he began shifting in his seat under the uncomfortable stare of his mother. Eventually he couldn't take any more and broke the silence. Mom? Naruto asked quietly. Kushina blinked for a moment before blushing slightly and scratching the back of her head. She'd begun spacing out thinking about the conversation she wanted to have with him. It weighed heavily on her and she feared what it might do to her beloved boy to know the truth of his burden and responsibility. She used to bemoan her lot in life as the Jinchuriki of Konoha. At least for her that fact was kept under wraps. For her son it was known, and it meant that even though people treated him well for being heir to the Uzumaki clan, she could never be certain who truly supported him and who was just trying to play on his good side. Thankfully, the addition of Karen's sensory ability with being able to tell if someone was lying when talking with them, it still wasn't perfect sadly. Neither was it truly Naruto's ability. Mom? What did you want to talk about? Naruto asked, breaking her from her thoughts once again. Sorry, sweetie. My thoughts are just a bit scrambled today. Kushina said with an apologetic tone. Naruto nodded to her in understanding, or at least partial understanding of her issue. It has something to do with whatever you wanted to talk about, right? The boy asked. Though he already knew he was right. Clever as usual. Kushina said with a small melancholy grin as she rubbed his head affectionately. You're right, I have been meaning to tell you something for a while now, but I initially wanted to wait till you were older. Kushina trailed off at the thoughts now swirling in her head. Naruto grimaced at where this line of topic was headed. He wasn't used to his mother acting so scattered in her thoughts. She was usually a very loving but strict and no-nonsense type of person. For Kushina, her thoughts drifted to the words she would be telling her son. She had been so sure of herself when she decided to explain things to him, but now actually trying to, and she kept hitting some sort of barrier, and her thoughts became scrambled. There's really no easy way to explain, I guess. She finally said while letting out a long pained sigh. He'd grown quite used to seeing his mother tired and distraught over the last couple of years, but this was something different entirely. He wasn't sure how to really react or what to do with the way she was talking and sighing so much. One thing was certain though, she looked more tired than he had ever seen before. More sad too. More than even when she explained he had taken a life the night they were nearly kidnapped. Trying his best to comfort her, he gripped her hand, bringing the soft smile back to her face. Right, so like a band-aid. I know you already know what a Jinchuriki is. I've taught you that in our sealing practice sessions. You're Jinchuriki of the Kyuubi. Just like I used to be the Jinchuriki. She explained. The little boy blinked a couple moments, staring down at the floor. Kushina simply watched as he worked to wrap his head around the information. She wasn't about to baby him. It was harsh, she knew, but she needed him to grow stronger from this. Harden from it. It would make it easier for him once she was gone to be just that much sterner. You used to be the Jinchuriki? Naruto asked as he finally looked up at her. Kushina fought off a frown at the look in her son's eyes. She knew it was for the best, but seeing the fear, pain, and confusion in those shiny blue eyes stung at her heart painfully. Yeah, I was the second. Before me, Mito Senju, formerly Uzumaki, was the first Jinchuriki for the Kyuubi. Unlike the other beasts, only someone with Uzumaki vitality can safely hold the Kyuubi, so it always has to be someone from our clan, at least until someone invents a superior holding seal than we have so far. The way things are, that isn't going to happen anytime soon, sadly. Kushina trailed off sadly. She had been working on just that after marrying Minato and retiring from field work. Her hope was to make it to where not only her clan would be cursed with bearing the Kyuubi, hopefully freeing her descendants, especially her son, from such a burden. There had never been enough time though, and even now the work was less than half completed. She just couldn't compensate for all the beast's chakra forcefully mixing with its hosts. It was too massive and too corrosive. So, what does that mean, Mom? Naruto asked, a little bit more fearfully. It means that you are more than just the heir to our clan. You are essentially a military asset. Every village, or at least every major village, utilizes 4 ways to categorize shinobi. The first 3 are obvious. There's a shinobi's official rank, genin, chunin, jonin, so on and so forth. Then there is the bingo book ranking, D class, C class, up to S class, or in some truly terrifying cases SS class. Then there is the bounty rank, how much someone is worth captured dead or alive, usually included alongside their bingo book ranking. Kushina explained. Naruto nodded along. All that was pretty common knowledge even to a kid if they knew the basics about shinobi life. The final form is usually specific to the village that shinobi belongs to. Konoha uses a color system. It defines how valuable to Konoha or Konoha's war effort someone is. Most civilians are code white. The lowest code, they are important enough to save, but considered next to worthless in the grand scheme of things. It's cold-hearted but sadly the truth. Any individual civilian isn't worth much to Konoha as a whole. That being said, some civilians, like business owners or landowners or those with skilled abilities like blacksmithing or medical knowledge, might be blue or green scale. Important enough for them and their families to perhaps have a solo mission to escort them to safety in the event of an attack. Then things begin to become a bit dodgy. Most kids in your position as a clan heir are at least a yellow on this scale. Meaning they take priority over even skilled civilians. However, some clans are more important. Our clan would place you normally at an orange level, meaning it is imperative that you be protected. Being as I am no longer a shinobi and am slowly passing, I am currently a yellow. You are not an orange though. Being the last male Uzumaki, as well as having shown to have our bloodline, would be more than enough to make you orange. Being a Jinchuriki would place you in red category, usually the highest level a person can receive outside the elders and Hokage. Kushina explained. So I'm a red category then? Naruto asked in wonder, stunned a bit by his importance to Konoha. Not quite, sweetie. I'll come back to that. Kushina smiled sadly at the confused look on the boy's face. You know, you never ask me about your father. Kushina said with a small laugh. Minato would be so upset about the boy's lack of interest in him if he could see it. Well, I mean, I always had you and Uncle Tabi, so I just kind of thought you and he, Naruto answered before jumping back a little as Kushina seemed to curl in herself. Oh Kami, no. No. Never, clear your mind of such thoughts right now. Ugh, Kushina groaned, causing the boy to smirk at the exaggerated way she refuted his logic. Well, then who is he? Naruto asked, actually curious now. Kushina took a minute to collect herself. The gross thoughts by Naruto's innocent-sounding words still rolling around in her head, making her face scrunch up as if she had eaten a lemon. Your father was a great shinobi and my best friend Naruto. He saved me from being kidnapped when I was a new genin by the cloud. She explained, causing her son to tilt his head. The fourth saved you though. So the fourth was my dad. No wonder it was a big secret. Naruto thought calmly before his eyes narrowed and his mother watched the gears in his mind start spinning at lightning speed. Wait, the fourth is the one that defeated the Kyuubi, which means he is the one that sealed it in me, which means my own father sealed it into me, he puzzled out in a quiet voice. Kushina finally wrapped him in a hug. She couldn't let him turn any anger onto Minato. The man had done all he could for their family, but had been caught between a rock and a hard place literally. Naruto had been the only thing he loved more than the village, not even she had that spot, just his beloved son. Don't hate him for it, Naruto, he had no choice. He could have only sealed it back into me, but the strain would have killed me and the Kyuubi would just form again in time and wreak vengeance on Konoha. So to make sure I could live and see you grow for at least some time, he used a sealing method that took his own soul as payment to seal the Kyuubi within you, she said as she soothingly stroked the boy's back. As Naruto tried and failed to hold back the tears at all this information dumped on him, she remembered just how young her baby still was. Not even in the academy yet, and still she was piling such heavy burdens on his shoulders. It wasn't fair. Nothing was fair though. She knew that. The reality of their world was that you either were broken by the events that happened or you surpassed them and were made stronger for it. She had to do everything she could to make sure nothing would break her sweet son. That meant burdening him to strengthen him against heavier burdens in the future. They stayed like that for a while, no sound but the like sobbing of a little boy, letting the strong mask slip for just a moment to mourn a father he would never know and grieve on the reality of his burden. Eventually though, Kushina pulled him away from her and held him at arm length. Giving him a sad smile, the boy returned it and Kushina couldn't help but feel her heart warm at the sight of her child, trying so hard to make her proud. He always did anyway, but seeing him face something like learning about this made it all the more obvious that she was a very proud mother. Like I was saying before, Naruto. Your father loved you more than anything else in this world. I can promise you that. Enough that he sacrificed himself to the Shinigami itself to protect you the only way he could. Now, like I said, the Hokage and a select few others are categorized as Code Blacks. The truly highest rank. Surpassing even that of Red. In the event of an emergency, Anbu form up around Code Black subjects to ensure their safety. You, because of who you are, fall into that category. Son of a Hokage, Jinchuriki, heir to the Uzumaki, and prodigious bloodline user and shinobi in training. She explained. Why does all that matter, Mom? Why are you telling me about the code system? Naruto asked, regaining more control over his tears now and drying his eyes with his sleeve. Because I want you to know that no matter what happens, you are important to more people than just your old mother. You are one of the most important people in this village, and just because you are Jinchuriki does not mean I want you throwing yourself at the enemies of Konoha like a weapon. You're more than that. Understand? She said, growing more stern at the end. But Naruto only nodded, her eyes hardened a bit more. Understood? She asked again. Yes. Naruto was vocal and confident with his voice this time, as well as nodding his head for emphasis. Good. Now go watch your face. I felt the perimeter seals go off, and you don't want the girls picking on you for crying, do you? She asked with a teasing smile, causing the boy to scurry off toward the washroom. Watching him go, she sighed once again and looked up to the ceiling, wondering if Minato was able to see any of the stress her life was giving her. Slowly standing and rubbing at her aching neck, Kushina began making her way to help Rin with preparing some extra food for the rest of the bundle of children, and shinobi she had no doubt would be joining them for tonight. Hokage Tower, Hokage Office, Konoha. Yugao had made it to the Hokage's office in good time. Little Sakura had felt as if she had been flying as the Kunoichi carried her across the rooftops and tree branches of the village, on a direct path to what largely acted as the village's beating heart of shinobi activity. While few civilians spotted them, other shinobi traveling similarly or just minding their own business stared after the odd sight. It wasn't every day they saw one of Konoha's more prodigious shinobi of the younger generations running past with a child in her arms. While it was in shinobi nature to be curious or even a bit overbearing when it came to that curiosity, they knew better than to pry into business that was meant for the Hokage, and by Yugao's direction and speed, it was clear where she was headed. Once at the tower, the shinobi made way for her as she moved to the Hokage's office and waited patiently for her turn. By now the little girl in her arms had begun to shrink in on herself at the glances from the various office nin within the tower. When the doors finally opened and Yugao made her way in, letting Sakura down for the first time since finding her in the alley, she nearly bowed as was custom for Anbu, before remembering she was in her normal jonin uniform and unmasked. Lord Hokage, apologies for the bother, but I wish to speak with you about mishandling of a specific case. Yugao said as she bowed her head slightly. Hiruzen puffed at his pipe as he moved the paperwork in front of him to the side of his desk. Taking a second to look over the two, Hiruzen struggled to recall the girl with Yugao until the pink hair caught his eyes and he recalled the terrible incident not too long ago. He had personally interviewed the girl's father following the event, as both Sakura and her twin Natsu showed such great potential at such young ages. He had been somewhat suspicious of the man's declining emotional state following his injuries in the Third War, but even more so with the loss of his wife. Still, Kizashi Haruno had passed the psychological evaluation he had ordered following the accident with Sakura. Hiruzen had simply moved on and looked forward to seeing the future careers of both children once they graduated from the academy. He had no doubt both would show, just like his student Jiraiya and formerly Orochimaru, that non-clan shinobi could compete with clan-born ninja. One of those two kids was now clutching tightly at one of his most useful shinobi's pant legs while staring at him in a sort of awe. It was always something like this, he supposed. He would need to have someone look into the issues with Kizashi again. He knew it hadn't felt right. He just disliked being right all the damn time. I see that. Hello there, Sakura, right? Hiruzen asked in a friendly tone, getting a stunned look from the little girl that the Hokage of all people recognized her. Yes sir. She replied with a smile and a blush at the grandfatherly man looking over his desktop at her. Well, it's a pleasure to meet you once again, little one. You look a little lost. Can you tell me why you aren't home with your brother and father right now? He asked gently, knowing the question could likely upset the poor girl. Of course he was right as usual when he watched the little girl look down at the floor and try and fight back her tears. Slowly she raised her head to answer him, and Sarutobi and Yugao both were surprised by the power of will the little one had. Sakura began. Haruno-san said I was not welcome in his house if I couldn't even do simple household tasks. He threw me out and I haven't seen him or Natsu for a long time. Hiruzen stood slowly and made his way around to the girl before couching down closer to her height. He gently rubbed her head, almost frowning at the way the girl leaned into his hand like an attention-starved pet. This wouldn't do at all. You know what, I imagine you must be hungry. What do you say about Yugao-chan picking something up for the two of you to snack on? I know an excellent dango shop about a block from here that you both can head to. Sound good? Hiruzen asked with a smile, getting a hopeful grin from the girl before she nodded so fast he began worrying she might be in need of a neck brace. Stepping back, he wrote a small note for his secretary to give the child a small task so he could speak with Yugao briefly before he sent her on her way with temporary orders. Sakura, this is a note giving orders to my secretary right outside the office door. I want you to take it to her and don't let anyone but her see what's inside, that includes yourself. Even orders for dango coupons have to follow protocol, right? The Hokage said, getting a serious nod from the child. After only brief hesitation at the door with a glance back to the Hokage and kind Jonin woman, Sakura stepped out of the office to give the orders to the secretary. As soon as the doors closed, Hiruzen's small smile slid off his face and a furious expression took its place. To treat a child like that in his village? Not damn likely. Sarutobi had to force himself to take a breath and regain his bearings. It was already nearing dark and really he had no doubt dealing with Kizashi would be a pain in the ass. What was important was to set Sakura up with a place to get cleaned up, fed, and a roof over her head. Lord Hokage, I have a suggestion. Yugao said, breaking him from his thoughts. Sarutobi simply motioned for her to speak with a wave of his hand. Well, sir, I was thinking. The complex you place myself and Hade into to watch over Carrie and Samui has several spare rooms. Not to mention I was due to join the Uzumaki clan for dinner tonight along with the others. Perhaps taking Sakura in alongside Carrie and Samui would be prudent. She continued. In reality she felt guilty when it came to Sakura. She could have pushed to better check over the situation with her family after the death of the girl's mother, but she hadn't. Indirectly as it was, she felt responsible for not finding the girl sooner. Add on to that she was already looking after a pair of girls the same age and had room and funds to spare easily, it was no issue, at least in her mind. Hiruzen knew things might get a bit messy with Kizashi, but for at least the time being, Yugao's solution was both the simplest and probably the overall best option. He had no doubt that both Yugao and Hate were more than capable of handling them, and he could probably get Danzo and his old teammates on board if he explained just how unique the Haruno twins' position was. Neither child was below an orange on the village's asset scale. They had to become shinobi for the village. This might actually help Sakura toward that as well. That will do fine. Take her to get cleaned up and dressed in some new clothes, Yugao. When you take her to dinner, explain everything to Hade, Kushina, Rin, and Kyra privately. Whatever Sakura wishes to explain about her situation to the other kids is up to her. Hiruzen explained as he wrote up actual orders for funds to be given to Yugao to treat Sakura to some dango and get her some new clothing. A week's worth of clothes would be good for now, he decided, though time might tell they may be moving her into this new setup permanently, so he would need to be ready for that. That could wait for the morning. As it was, he wanted to get home to his own family. His daughter had a little one of her own now, and Hiruzen had been looking forward to babysitting his grandson for a couple hours this evening so she and his son-in-law could have a bit of free time. Sadly Hokage's work is never done. As Yugao stepped out of the room, Jiraiya stepped in. A look of curiosity in regard to Yugao and the small urchin in the antechamber to the Hokage's office was plastered on his face. Behind it though, Hiruzen could also note the clear annoyance he had from his small mission. The Hokage simply hoped it didn't mean the sealing had failed. That was another high-profile shinobi candidate he hoped to press into the village's service within the next few years. Success or failure? Hiruzen asked as he stepped around his desk and dropped into his chair before working to relight his pipe. Not even a hello? Jiraiya asked. It's been years, sensei. Cut the act, Jiraiya. I want to go home and spend time with my family. Besides, I just saw you yesterday as Hideki. Sarutobi scoffed. I don't see why you are all wound up. You see your grandkid every day. Jiraiya said as he began retrieving an outfit from a pack. I see you every day too. How long are you going to continue this charade? I understood why for the wars and even to separate Minato from Naruto, but why keep it up now? I mean, it could easily be explained away that the sealing master Jiraiya took interest in the last Uzumaki clan members. No one would make the connection between the boy and his father. Hideki has been the retainer of the Uzumaki clan since the Second Shinobi War, old man. I helped Mito-sama practically raise Kushina. She knows who I really am, but Hideki is important for the clan. Jiraiya explained as he applied the tag to the back of his neck that slightly altered his appearance. That is a fair point, I suppose. Still, sometimes I can't help but wonder who you hold true loyalty to, Konoha or the Uzumaki. Hiruzen knew he was being a bit unfair, but these days, with the actions of those he had once trusted absolutely like Tsunade and Orochimaru, he couldn't feel too cautious. The third Hokage could only frown as Jiraiya, or rather Hideki Tabibito, ignored him in favor of adjusting his armband, signifying his allegiance to the Uzumaki clan. He supposed that was answer enough, wasn't it? I had asked if the mission was a success or a failure earlier. Hiruzen said after Hideki turned back to look at him. Mission success, no issues with the sealing or the heiress. However, there were some issues with the two Kunoichi sent to assist me. I hadn't realized how bad the blood between Kaira and Kurenai has gotten. Hideki rattled off fluently. As usual, the ease with which Jiraiya transformed his personality to fit his alias slightly disturbed the Hokage. If he hadn't watched him change, he would have no way of knowing they were the same people. Their accents were even different. Yes, it's only gotten worse as the two of them have grown up. They normally can handle missions with one another with no issue, but they are venomous when they can be. Hiruzen said. Venomous? Huh, yeah, that covers it pretty well. I think a reminder would go a long ways towards staying professional. Hideki suggested. Noted. Now what can we expect for Yakumo? Hiruzen asked. Better than I feared, about what I was hoping for. Her abilities are still usable. Albeit to a much lesser degree, but the entity is fully sealed off from both her consciousness and subconsciousness. It will effectively die within a few years and she will gain full range of her abilities. We might have to watch out for a sort of rebirth of the thing then, but our only real concern until that time is that the entity finds some form of crack in the array applied. That's part of why I had Kaira memorize the seal herself. She has enough knowledge that she should be able to maintain the seal and repair any damage, should I be unavailable. He explained. Excellent, so Yakumo is clear to begin training to be a shinobi once more then? Hiruzen asked. Yeah, but you might have her receive some remedial physical training. She has a bit of a frail disposition and could use the build-up. She'll never be anything other than a Jinjutsu specialist, but she will still need to work on her physical abilities if she wants to be a Kunoichi. Hideki commented. I'll make note of it in her file for the academy. Now unless you have something else, let's both go home. The Hokage said as he stood up. Yeah, actually about that girl with Yugao, right? Hiruzen sighed out as he began collecting his things to go home. That was an unwelcome surprise. I might need your help with speaking to someone within the next few days, so stay free, right? Hideki said with some confusion as he followed Hiruzen, while the elderly Kage explained the background and current situation of the Haruno family. Uzumaki compound, dining hall, Konoha. The Uzumaki dining room was crowded, as it tended to be these days. Kushina insisted Naruto invite his friends over as often as possible, and more often than not every seat at the table would be filled with guests. Watching her son adjusting from what she had explained to him as he spent time with Karen and the others gave her some reassurance that even when she was gone, he would have plenty of loved ones to care for him. Rin had all but forced the matriarch of the Uzumaki into her chair while recruiting Hade and Taka to help her bring the dishes out and set the table. The young woman would do well as a caretaker for Naruto when she was gone as well. It probably wasn't the glorious life a young Rin had imagined as a small girl, but Kushina could tell she was more than simply content being surrounded by family and helping any way she could. Naruto and the girls were in the adjacent room, just visible through the hall door, sitting around and evidently catching up over whatever exciting events he had missed out during his studies with Kushina. The story from Karen about what had happened in the marketplace was of course the main topic of discussion. Naruto had no doubt that had he chosen to share what his mother had told him earlier, it would have been the focus of conversation, but he wasn't ready to reveal that all yet. Perhaps he would tell Karen and Satsuki about it in private. Yeah, then Yugao-sensei had Hate-sensei bring us here. I don't really know what was going on, but she must be helping whoever was so upset. Karen explained. I hope whoever it is okay. If Yugao-sensei went straight to the Hokage then it must have been serious. Naruto said with a thoughtful look. Yeah. I've never seen her like that before. Carrie said with a bit of worry. It'll be fine. Yugao and Hade are some of the best jonin in Konoha, according to Kyra anyway. Naruto commented. Yeah, Yugao-sensei is usually completely cool and collected, but she seemed bothered when she sent that clone to tell Hade-sensei to take us home, Samui pointed out. Like I said, Yugao and Hade are among the top jonin for Konoha. We should focus more on what we will be doing in training. Satsuki-chan, you have the fireball jutsu your dad taught you down right? Naruto asked, getting Satsuki to brighten up. Of course, I got it down in record time, according to my mom and dad. I just had to recover cause I overdid it in training. That's why I missed out today. She said with a bit of embarrassment at the end. We should all get our sensei to teach us an elemental jutsu. Something basic but powerful like Satsuki's fireball. It will put us ahead of all the other kids joining the academy for the next 2 years. Naruto said eagerly. Naruto-sama, I think you are overestimating the other kids a bit. From what Samui and I have seen they are all really poorly trained. I think some of them actually have no training prior to the academy at all. Karen explained. Naruto stopped and blinked at that. Beside him Satsuki had a similar shocked expression before both of their faces slowly morphed into understanding. They were all clan children, even Carrie and Samui technically. Of course they had an advantage over the other students already. Still Naruto felt that his point remained. If we're already ahead of the civilians, we should aim to be ahead of all the other clan brats too. Maybe we can even graduate early. Naruto pressed. The sudden warmth of another person behind him, wrapping him into a hug, caused him to jolt before leaning back into the comforting embrace. He knew these arms well, they wrapped him up almost as often as his mother's did. Don't be so eager to grow up, Naruto. Your mom and I enjoy having you as a kid, you know. Kyra spoke into his ear before hoisting him off the ground, getting giggles from the group of girls. Kyra, you're back, so it must be almost time for dinner then. Naruto said as he squirmed in her arms. Probably. Rin-chan no doubt has things all situated, so let's head in and get seated. Kyra said as she finally let the boy down, and he sent her a playful glare. The group stepped into the dining room. Kushina already sat at the head of the table with Naruto and Rin taking the spots on either side of her. Kyra ended up in the spot beside Rin, while Satsuki took the place beside Naruto. The rest of the group filled in the open places along the table's sides, as well as a couple of unexpected additions. Yugao had arrived at the compound with a cute pink-haired girl, roughly the age of the other children, clutching onto Yugao's vest with one hand tightly as she stared back at the curious looks from the others. The silence only lasted a brief moment before Kushina waved them in to sit along with the others and join them for dinner. The group dug in while slowly starting into conversations. Steadily Sakura was pulled into talking with the others and the true personality of the girl took control as she quickly found her way into the group of friends. By the end of the meal, with Hideki joining halfway through, the Uzumaki compound was lively and filled with laughter. The situation, or at least the part pertaining to Sakura's new living arrangements, were made known, and already the group of shinobi seemed to be bonding. Naruto having adopted Kyra as an unknowingly his father's system of introductions. The next Sakura, feeling the warmth of home for the first time in months, joined the other kids for their training. Led by Naruto's example, the group threw themselves into their training with an unnatural seriousness for children their age. Naruto held a small smile on his face as he and the other members of his small clan made their way to his closest friend's home. Satsuki's clan compound was on the outermost edge of the village, opposite the smaller Uzumaki compound, forcing the group to walk through almost the entire village to reach it. It was nice to an extent, the recently turned 7-year-old thought. His mother was having a good day and was largely walking all on her own, some of her color had even returned, and the smile on her face was bright as he remembered from before the incident with Kumo. Eren and Taka had joined them, and while Uncle Tabi and Kyra and Rin for some reason barred from coming with them, Naruto's friends, Carrie, Samui, and Sakura, as well as their guardians Yugao and Hade, had joined them about halfway to the Uchiha compound. Not even the eyes of the village could dampen Naruto's spirits for the day. After all, this party they were going to was for Naruto, Satsuki, and to a lesser extent Carrie and Sakura starting at the academy. Eren and Samui had started the year prior and had talked about how easy everything was compared to their normal training with Kyra, Yugao, and Hade. It should have been obvious, of course. The three jonin had taken to training the kids as if they were fresh genin and not about to start at the academy. That was fine by Naruto. The sooner he was a full shinobi and could show that he was strong enough to protect himself, the better. His friends followed the same path, but they didn't have that drive, the reason behind pushing so hard. Naruto's plan was to graduate within a year alongside all his friends and end up on a pair of teams together so they could really put their teachers' and caregivers' worries to rest. Most importantly his mother's, before she passed on. That thought almost put a damper on his mood, but he brushed it aside. He'd come to accept the inevitable. All he could focus on in regards to his mom soon dying was that she was comfortable and didn't have to worry about him when she went on to the Pure Lands. On bad days the feeling of uselessness in helping her drove him crazy, but on days like today he drew on the words Kyra had told him in the past. "You sure are chipper, Naruto-sama," Taka said as she grinned down at the boy. Taka and Karen still insisted on calling him and his mother with formal titles, even after being family for years. It had recently spread to Sakura as well, which frustrated him to the endless humor of his mother and the rest of their friends. "Yeah, well this party means we're going to all be shinobi soon. Plus I hardly ever get to visit Satsuki's house. She always has to come to our compound or a training ground or the girl's house," Naruto explained as he swung his arm toward Kari, Samui and Sakura to indicate which girls he meant specifically. "I don't really like going to the Uchiha compound. It's so far away and they always act so weird when we visit," Sakura said. "It's not weird. They act rude. They're all stuck up." "Well, all of them but Satsuki and Mikoto-san," Samui said. "Satsuki can be pretty stuck up too. She's just our stuck up princess though, so it's okay," Kari said with a snort, getting a laugh from the adults as well. "Either way, it's best you all stay on your best behavior." Naruto said. "Yes Koch-an, I will behave myself and not start arguing with Fugaku about something," Kushina stressed. "Fine, but they are rude. I mean they won't even let Uncle Tobia, Rin and Kyra come. They all are so mean to Kyra and Rin." Naruto grumbled, though he smiled again as Kushina gently ran her hand through his hair. "That we can agree on Naru-chan but still best behavior," Kushina stated. "I understand," her son replied, smiling up at her. She giggled a bit while Kari mumbled mama's boy, getting an elbow in the side by Samui and a glare from Naruto. Kushina and the adults just laughed some more at the antics of the kids. Kushina wished her baby had more time to just be a kid like this. She knew his plan to graduate early and try and prove how strong and skilled he was. She'd pulled some strings with the Hokage and after convincing several close friends who happened to be clan heads, she managed to get him to place an edict banning early graduation starting this year. No doubt she was setting herself up to hear a little tirade from her son and his friends, but as much as she worked to prepare him, she did want Naruto to not grow up too fast and miss everything a child should enjoy. "We're almost there, so remember your manners and no back-talking to the guards. The Uchiha police have enough to deal with without mouthy kids, right?" Kushina reminded them yet again. "Yes ma'am." They chorused in various states of annoyance at being repeatedly reminded. They were being treated like regular delinquents. They were good kids really. A small group was welcomed into the compound. The guards were a little hesitant with those not from the Uzumaki clan, but they let them pass when Mikoto and Itachi came to meet them at the gate. Leading them in toward the main hall of the compound, the women caught up while the children simply looked around at the miniature village. Naruto took in the appearance of a far larger and more populated compound than his own. Uchiha crests hung practically everywhere and in every size. He also noticed a distinct difference between those that wore the fan on their clothes and those that didn't. Only the shinobi are allowed to wear the crest. They had to have made the fireball jutsu successfully to earn the patch. Itachi suddenly explained, catching Naruto off guard. He wasn't the biggest fan of Satsuki's big sister, something that weirdly pleased her quite a lot. He wasn't sure what it was, maybe Itachi's demeanor whenever she spoke to someone. Like she was only partially there thinking about something else. It rubbed him the wrong way. It was more than that though. The way she treated her own family, especially her mother, bothered him. Itachi acted as if Mikoto was a terrible mother, always acting as if anything she said was a waste of time or simply stupid. The hurt he could see from Mikoto every time it happened made him imagine his own mother in a similar fashion, and it pissed him off. So he simply ignored Itachi, not that it seemed to bother the older girl in the slightest. Kushina sighed as her son seemed to forget her repeated reminders to be polite and behave almost the moment they walked in the gate. The moment they were inside of the main hall, a very well-dressed Satsuki rushed out to greet them. She stifled a giggle at seeing Naruto stuffed into a formal kimono, knowing his dislike for the clothing. "Don't laugh," he groaned. "Gee, Naruto, not even a hello Satsuki, I'm happy to see you or anything," she said with a smirk. "I saw you yesterday, Satsuki. Plus you're laughing at me." He scowled. "Well, you're in a kimono so it's funny. You always just want to wear those training clothes. It's nice seeing you in something different. Plus what do you all think of my clothes?" Satsuki asked as her attention shifted from Naruto to the other girls. A single boy awkwardly stood beside them as the girls chattered on about their various outfits or even his outfit. The older women did the same, talking about how cute all of them looked. Don't try to make sense of it, kid. Trust me, it's a lot easier that way. Hayate said with a chuckle as Naruto glanced up at the only other male in the group. Naruto didn't get to respond before they had to begin heading into the hall for the celebration. Once inside, Naruto was a bit surprised. He hadn't expected the Great Hall to be quite so on the nose in description. An entire building dedicated to a single room. There were sitting mats and chairs along the sides of the room and a pair of tables along the farthest wall from the door. Uchiha clan members milled about, talking or enjoying small drinks or snacks from the tables. A few acknowledged them, but most largely stuck to themselves. Naruto hadn't met Satsuki's father in person before. Or at least not officially anyway. He knew immediately that he wasn't someone he would ever be fond of though, as he approached the small collection of guests, followed by what looked to Naruto to be the Uchiha clan elders. As he approached, it seemed like all three of the Uchiha females beside him grew tense. He couldn't say it was fear of Fugaku, but more like they simply wanted to put on a good face in front of him. The idea that they'd pretend to act differently in front of a family member to impress them disgusted Naruto. It disgusted his female family as well, not that any of them, but Karen knew how the others reacted to him. "Uzumaki-san," Fugaku said gruffly, but still politely. "Welcome, Fugaku. Thank you for greeting us." Kushina said in the most forced polite tone Naruto had ever heard from his mother. Of course, it is what only clans as venerable as the Uchiha, Uzumaki, and Senju deserve, at the least. The man said. "Right, well, you know me and your clan members." Naruto thought it odd that she referred to Fugaku's wife and daughters as clan members and nothing more to him. "This is Taka, head of the priestess branch, her daughter Karen, Kari Ikazuchi and Samui Amasa, Sakura, and Yugao and Hayate. Of course this is Naruto as well." Fugaku didn't even look at the guests not of the Uzumaki clan. He eyed Taka appreciatively, causing Kushina to bite back an insult and Makoto to scowl ever so faintly. His eyes slowly scanned over Karen and Naruto as well before they fell back onto Kushina, and he nodded. "A pleasure to meet you all. Now, I have prepared an announcement before the celebration, so please follow me up to the tables." Fugaku said as he pivoted on his foot and strode off, elders still in pursuit. "Come on, he's not patient by any means, and a moody Fugaku is more than I have patience to deal with," Kushina said as she guided the group along. Or more, she guided the Uzumaki and Uchiha along. Shisui seemed to melt out of the crowd and managed to keep the forest of the guests from wandering up before the clan. As Fugaku had made it clear. They simply weren't of the same breeding of clans such as the Uchiha and Uzumaki were. The crowd, made up almost entirely of Uchiha, watched on as the head of the Uchiha and his wife, along with the heads of the Uzumaki, escorted the three children in front of them. As they stepped before them, the room quieted down and the murmured conversation died away. Those further toward the back pressed forward to hear the clan head speak. "Kinsman," Fugaku began, silencing any quiet murmurs that had yet to die away. "Today, we celebrate the fact that my youngest, Satsuki, will be taking some of her first steps as a kunoichi of the Uchiha clan. She already has earned her right to wear the crest of our clan on her person. However, now she will join others of her age, including the young Uzumaki heirs here beside me in the academy." There was clapping and a couple of whistles, but the Uchiha were a somewhat stoic clan, so the applause was limited and brief. Fugaku still lifted a hand to silence his gathered clansmen before he decided to continue. He placed a hand on Satsuki's shoulder and briefly glanced at Naruto before turning back to the gathered audience. "It is also with great pleasure that I announce the betrothal of Naruto and Satsuki to commence in marriage once both are 16. Fugaku said clearly, surprising a few of the crowd, none more than Naruto and Karen, though Satsuki seemed to have known it was coming. "But this we will bind our ancient and pure clans together, strengthening both and hopefully helping our new kinsmen to grow to once again become a strong and thriving clan." Again applause, this time far more exuberant, spread across the room. Naruto was a bit shocked by the support they all had for the idea of Satsuki essentially marrying into another clan. He wasn't angry or honestly even really surprised by the fact he would be marrying Satsuki. It seemed so far off from now, and she was his best friend anyway. "I have no doubt that with Naruto, Satsuki will bring many great shinobi into the world for our clans," Fugaku said proudly before signaling for the celebration to properly begin, never noticing the look on his daughter's face. Satsuki's eyes began to slowly well with tears as her smile slid off her face. She looked as if she had been slapped by her father as he said his final words. Itachi strode off, an unsurprised look on her face as she went. Satsuki, however, finally realized what her sister and mother already knew all along. Fugaku thought lowly of women, he thought of Satsuki as nothing more than an incubator for the next generation of Uzumaki clansmen, bound to alliance with the Uchiha. Naruto and Karen trailed after Satsuki as she quickly made her way out of the hall. Kushina and Makoto did their best to keep attention away from the kids as they slipped out. Satsuki at least had enough control to keep from letting her tears show until after she was free of the crowded hall. "Satsuki, wait up," Naruto said as he and Karen caught up to the Ravenette. As she stopped, she tried to wipe away the tears on her face. "I'm fine, really. Go back to the party, I'll be there soon," she said weakly. "Everyone there is old anyway. Except for the girls, but they'll be fine by themselves for a bit," Naruto said simply as he plopped down on the edge of a short wall beside his friend and now betrothed. "Plus Satsuki-sama, if you and Naruto-sama are going to get married that makes you a part of our clan, right?" Karen insisted. Satsuki scoffed at that, glancing toward the hall where she knew her father was sucking up to the elders like always. She didn't mind being arranged to marry someone. Especially if it was someone she actually liked like her best friend. She knew plenty of noble girls that met with her father or with her big sister that were arranged as well. True, it had sort of fallen out of popularity with ninja clans, but civilian nobles still practiced the act regularly. Enough that Satsuki sort of knew it would be her fate to begin with. It wasn't that was bothering her though. It was the fact that her dad's most prideful element about her growth was the fact she was another year closer to giving him male grandchildren. It suddenly made the last several years breaking her self-training with Naruto and the others feel worthless. It made her feel worthless and it made her furious. "Satsuki?" Naruto gasped. "Your eyes." "What?" she asked, a bit stunned by Naruto's own shocked reaction. "It's the Sharingan," Karen said in surprise as she looked at the two red eyes, a single tomo in each. "Come on, we should go tell your parents. Your dad would be really proud of you," Naruto suggested, having guessed what upset her earlier. "No," she snapped, causing both Uzumaki children to stop and look at her with confused expressions. "No, just keep it between us. My dad doesn't need to know about my eyes. I'll tell mom later when we're alone, but promise me you'll keep this a secret," Satsuki demanded. "Are you sure, Satsuki?" Naruto asked. He assumed she would be trying even harder to earn Fugaku's approval after tonight. "Yes," Satsuki said as she practiced activating and deactivating her eyes for a couple of seconds before having to sit down on the short wall herself. It was a bit draining just activating the eyes, not to mention the dizzy feeling the eyes themselves gave her for a split second upon activating them. "Well, if that's what you really want, Satsuki-sama," Karen said with a shrug. "Don't call me that," Satsuki said. "Don't call you what?" Karen asked. Naruto rolled his eyes beside the two girls, though he was smirking a bit as he caught on to Karen's game. It distracted Satsuki and helped her forget about Fugaku. "Karen, really why?" The dark-haired girl whined slightly. "It's only fitting, you'll be the Uzumaki matriarch one day. So you'll be Satsuki-sama to all sorts of people, but especially to me, since I'll be head of the branch house." Karen replied with a somewhat smug look, though none of the children really had a notion of why she might be smug about it. "Just call me Satsuki like you always do." The Uchiha continued to argue. "Satsuki, just give it up. I tried to get her to stop for months, remember? Now it's Naruto-sama this and Naruto-sama that," Naruto complained. The children enjoyed each other's company, eventually being joined by Sakura, Samui, and Kari, along with their guardians. They slowly made their way back to the hall. Eating the party foods and drinking the party drinks while trying to avoid the congratulations of their betrothal from every adult in the building. Thankfully, they were still all relatively young children, despite their advanced maturity and intelligence for their ages, and they grew tired. Their parents escorted them home, Kushina carrying her boy like she used to. Enjoying having a day where she was fit enough to still baby him slightly. The next morning was Naruto's first day at the academy. Most of Naruto's guardian figures were happy to walk with him and his friends to the academy. Sadly, Uncle Tabi was out on one of his missions again, but he had left a message for Naruto and his friends, wishing them luck and telling them he was proud of them all. Kushina even joined them, though she seemed much weaker than the day prior. Thankfully, Satsuki and her mother had come early to walk with them to the academy. A few other mothers with academy-age kids that were close to Kushina joined them as well. Taka was a given, she loved walking with Karen to school, and Yugao had Kari and Sakura starting this year and Samui in the same year as Karen. The only real new member of the group was Tsume, as she brought Kiba and caught up with Kushina, who had rarely come out of the compound unless required over the last couple of years. The Inyazuka boy got along well enough with Naruto and the others, though he wasn't really part of their group of friends. He tried to get close to Naruto to an extent, but Naruto was a bit too mature for Kiba. Kiba was still of a mind Naruto was a bit weird for hanging out with girls all the time. Naruto just thought Kiba was too annoying to really relate with. Unlike Naruto's circle of friends, Kiba just wasn't as determined to be a shinobi. Sure, he was definitely above average, and that was for a clan kid, but in comparison to even Sakura, who wasn't a clan brat in any fashion, he just lagged behind because he was more concerned with playing than training. As the kids filed into the room, mothers and guardians calling out loving goodbyes behind them, he realized that Kiba wasn't the only one. As the other students came in, he started mentally comparing himself and his friends to them. Satsuki was already skilled at shuriken and kunai use, and that was before she unlocked her Sharingan the night before. She also kept up with him better than any other in Taijutsu, excluding actually graduated shinobi of course. She also had the grand fireball like all her fellow Uchiha shinobi. Very similarly was advanced for their age. She didn't quite compare to Satsuki with shinobi tools, but even now she carried a Ranten practice sword on her person. Once she graduated she'd exchange it for a real blade, but for now her practice blade was enough. She'd make a skilled sword mistress like Yugao one day, especially with the stunner jutsu she had learned over the last year, allowing her to stun an opponent and at high enough level, even temporarily paralyze them. Sakura was the weakest of their group. Boy, too shocking being as she was essentially civilian born unlike the rest of their group and had only been training with Naruto and the others for about a year. Still slowly but surely she had learned to properly handle Taijutsu and even properly control her chakra to avoid a blast like what had taken her mother from her. Their parents often said she could make an excellent medic nin or possibly a Genjutsu specialist, and she'd already started studying a little bit in both fields, though right now she was simply following the chakra training exercises from the beginner's books. Naruto was ahead even of his friends, closely followed by Satsuki of course. His chains had reached a point where he could trap and siphon others of their chakra or render them completely unable to jutsu while in his grasp. Not to mention he'd all but broken himself to learn a pair of basic water-style jutsu. The gunshot was especially powerful for him being as he had so much chakra to dump into the jutsu, he just had to be careful not to destabilize it by dumping too much into it. He also had the basics down for the water wall jutsu, but at the moment it was only strong enough to stop shuriken and poorly thrown kunai. It could surprise an opponent like it had done with Kyra during their training a week ago, but there was still quite a ways to go before he considered it ready for a fight. Altogether Naruto was sure they'd all be here a year and along with Samui and Karen be out the door as fresh genin just like Kyra had been. Unfortunately for his plans his own mother had made sure that such a thing didn't happen and that he and his friends would be forced to be children for at least a few more years. At least that was her hope. Naruto strove to be the top student from the onset of class. It didn't take long for the divides in the class to clearly form. The civilian students, excluding the Haruno twins due to their own unique situation, and Yakumo who was formerly of the Kurama clan, were clearly very new to this. Most of the activities were conditioning oriented and they fell behind even the frail Yakumo. The clan brats and shinobi-born children however also had a divide, just as Naruto had imagined, he and his friends surpassed all their fellow clan children easily. Natsu was also shocked to be outpaced by his sister who he hadn't seen in over a year. Sakura assumed he was angry that she was doing so well, though she refused to so much as talk to him even when he began to approach. It didn't help matters on that front that Kari looked ready to butt the boy down if he got close to Sakura at all. Naruto and the others made it clear they backed her up too, so the boy had left them alone. By the end of the day it was clear the top students were Naruto and Satsuki, comfortably holding top shinobi and top kunoichi respectively. Naruto looked forward to telling his mom about how close he was to graduation already. After seeing the children off at the academy gates, the mothers slowly made their way back toward the Uzumaki compound. Kushina had grown quiet and her hand tightly gripped Kyra's vest as they headed home. It was only a short ways from the compound's gates that her grip slipped free and she began to fall to the ground. Luckily Kyra was fast to react and had scooped the older woman into her arms before she hit the ground. The women said nothing as they did their best to keep pace with Kyra as she bolted into the compound and set Kushina carefully onto her bed. Rin was already there running diagnostic jutsu and asking questions of the women. Mikoto answered as Kyra simply stared down at the pained expression on her mother figure's face. A stab of dread and grief embedded it into her chest as yet another parental figure lay dying before her. Tsume had gone for the Hokage and active medic nin. Rin might be skilled, but she was retired from nin status for a reason. Yugao slowly touched Kyra's shoulder to try and break her free from her frozen state. Kyra, Yugao said quietly. Worried not only for Kushina, but also Kyra's state of mind running through her. She's so light. Like a feather. Has she not been eating? Kyra asked. The other women didn't answer, Rin simply working and doing what she could for the woman that had helped her fix her life after Obito died and her career came to an abrupt end. Hiruzen, Tsume, and the medic nin arrived in record time, but still there was only so much that could be done. As the kids were picked up from class by Taka, Yugao, and Mikoto, Naruto and Karen assumed that Kushina was a bit too weak to make the trip again. She had grown weaker and weaker, and despite having been better off the day before and this morning as far as the kids could tell, they knew things were growing worse. They didn't let it initially taint their mood though as it was a regular occurrence that Kushina was ill. So they met the women with smiles on their faces, ready to tell them all about the first day of the year, only for their smiles to dip, noticing the tears and clearly upset expressions on their faces. Mom? Satsuki asked worriedly as her mother wiped tears away. Sweetie, we need to head home so let's go alright. Mikoto said as she took her daughter's hand. As she led Satsuki off, the child twisted around to wave goodbye to her friends, while growing more worried about what was going on. "Girls, we had best be heading home too," Yuga said to her own charges. "Okay," they said in unison, shooting a worried look toward Naruto and Karen, more toward Naruto. They all knew Kushina had been slowly reaching the deadline the doctors had given her. As they were left alone, Naruto stared up at Taka, who dabbed at the tears in her eyes. She reached out to comfort him, but he stepped away from her as his mind processed what it knew was happening. Before she could stop him, Naruto bolted off toward the Uzumaki compound. Naruto-sama, wait. Taka cried, only to let out a frustrated sound as her own daughter shot after the boy as well. She too began racing back toward the Uzumaki compound. She couldn't help Kushina, and she would never imagine, let alone try to replace Naruto's mother, but she had to be there to comfort him. It was more than her duty. She saw him as her nephew, and she refused to let him suffer the loss of his mother alone. It took time, but eventually Taka caught Naruto just as he reached the gates to the compound. She had to explain that Kushina had been taken to the hospital and that they had done everything they could, but it wouldn't be long before she passed away. The boy fought back his tears and, only slightly more calmly than his mad rush back to the compound, followed Taka and Karen to the hospital. The moment they reached the doors, the pitying looks from the staff and the heartbroken expressions from his gathered loved ones felt like weights dropped onto him with each step further into the white halls of the hospital. When they made it to Kushina's room, Naruto and Karen stepped in together. They spoke for a short while with the woman as she lay on the bed, but eventually everyone but Naruto left the room to give mother and son privacy, to say their final goodbyes. "My big strong shinobi. Rookie of the year is in your future, no doubt in my mind," Kushina said softly as she stroked her son's hair. "Yeah," he answered weakly, causing her to lean forward and plant a kiss on Naruto's forehead. "Just don't focus too much on being a shinobi, sweetheart. Live life too. Enjoy the little things and keep your heart open to those that love you," she lectured. "I will, mom." Naruto choked out as he forced down a sob. "I know, baby. You are such a good son, Naruto. I will always thank Kami for letting me be your mom," she whispered to him as she lightly brushed his cheek. "Listen to me, baby, I have a few things I need to make sure you hear, okay?" Kushina said as she lifted her son's face up to lock eyes with him. A smile slipped onto her face seeing her boy's handsome face. "I love you, but you have to be strong, okay? Eat healthy like I taught you, work hard in school and always listen to your teachers. Rely on the people you love to help and love you too. Especially Uncle Tabi, Kyra, Rin, Taka, and Karen Satsuki too." "I will, mom. I promise I'll make you proud, Yakuno," Naruto said as fresh tears ran down his cheeks, getting a small chuckle from his mom at the tick she'd sadly passed on. "Oh sweetie, you already do make me proud. The proudest mother on earth. From the moment I knew I'd be having you I had nothing but pride and love for you. No matter what, I am always watching over you. From here are the Pure Lands," she said with a watery grin before tugging at his cheeks and getting him to climb into the bed beside her, just like they did when Naruto was little. The pair stayed like that, slowly drifting off to sleep together. Cuddling together as mother and son for the last time. Kushina Uzumaki then passed on to the Pure Lands peacefully in her sleep, leaving her young son as the next head of their shrinking clan. Following his mother's death and burial, Naruto missed a couple of weeks of the academy. His friends partially explained what had happened, though they mostly drove home the fact that if anyone bothered Naruto about it, that they would come down on them like a hammer. Most had a new image of Karen, Sakura, and Satsuki afterward. Harui and Samui were already considered violent due to prejudice against people from the cloud, but the other three girls had unknowingly picked up the legacy of their friend's deceased mother, as terrifying Kunoichi to be. Upon his return, Naruto committed himself to pushing even harder to excel. Instructors gossiped about how determined and prodigious he was, and his classmates soon began to defer to him regularly. Much like the girls had slowly shifted to doing over the last few years. There were a few issues with first some jealous civilian children trying to bully him and later older children as well, however either by his own fists or the girls, the brief period of having to deal with bullies was just that, brief. It didn't really slow him down in his training. If anything, it pushed a bit harder. By the time a month had passed since Naruto's return to the academy, he had mastered the water wall jutsu and moved on to his first attempt at a wind jutsu. A gift from his uncle Tabi for doing so well in class. It was a simpler one and not really all that dangerous to an opponent, designed to knock someone back if they got too close or knock an enemy off balance in a fight. Naruto got the jutsu down in no time at all, prompting Kyra to give him a more difficult one that didn't feed into his affinity for wind. He had yet to even manage to properly do the earth-style mud wall jutsu. So things continued like this for a few more months. The end of the year closed in, and after getting over the fact that they would not be graduating early due to an edict placed into effect by the third Hokage, Naruto and his friends had continued their training together outside of school and were showing great advancement to Kyra, Yugao, and Haid. Just as Naruto had begun to return to his happier self, still affected by Kushina's passing but managing extremely well for his age, another tragedy struck the group of friends. Naruto chuckled as Karen flopped onto the ground as Kyra declared their training session done for the night. Satsuki looked like she wanted to join her future clanswoman but opted to simply lean forward with her hands on her knees. The only boy of the group crossed his hands together on top of his head while Kyra quickly fixed up their training ground and looked over at the tired kids. The Gecko family, as Kyra had taken to jokingly calling Hade, Yugao, and their 3 charges had left early. Yugao had a longer-term mission starting the next day in Demon Country and would be gone for 4 months, so they wanted to have a night of enjoying one another's company with a family meal. Kyra couldn't help but love how cute the pair were together, especially with their girls around. "Alright kids, let's pack it in. We'll walk Satsuki home before the 3 of us head back to the compound. I heard Rin might be making ramen tonight," Kyra said, laughing lightly as Naruto and Karen let out a small cheer. She shared an amused look with Satsuki and the foursome headed off toward the distant Uchiha compound. They had trained a bit late today so the sun had set by the time they reached the gates of the compound. Kyra's eyes narrowed however when she noticed that the guards normally present outside the compound were nowhere to be seen. She said nothing to the kids, but by now they were plenty used to their tutor's mannerisms that they quieted down and also began noticing something was amiss. "Stay here," Kyra said with finality as she began to walk toward the open gate. "Wait, Kyra, what's going on?" Satsuki asked. The hair on the back of her neck was standing on end and she just felt like something was wrong. "I said stay here." "Alright. Just don't leave this spot, I'll be back soon, okay?" The Silver had ordered before taking off into the compound. Hoping she was wrong. She'd known issues with the Uchiha were growing, even more so with Kushina's death, causing some other clan heads to openly scorn the match of Naruto and Satsuki. Plus without an Uzumaki clan head the Uchiha were down an ally in the politics of Konoha. Hopefully though things were not as she feared. She cared for the Uchiha, one of her closest friends, and the boy who gave her her namesake had been a member of this clan. They despised her but somehow and for some reason she loved them. Back at the gate though things were quickly devolving as Naruto stood in Satsuki's way to prevent her from going in. She'd slapped and cursed at him. Called him all manner of names and threatened worse if he didn't move, but Naruto still stood in her way. "Satsuki-sama, please listen to him," Kyra said to stay here. Karen tried to argue. "I don't care, something is wrong and my family is in trouble." "I know it," she said before flipping her fingers through a set of seals, causing the other children's eyes to widen. Naruto matched her immediately, running through his own set of hand seals, creating a small wall of water to block the ball of fire sent his way. He was forced to move though as another 3 burst around his defense and impacted the stone. That was new, Naruto didn't know Satsuki had the Phoenix Flower Jutsu down, so we'll already. Sadly in the moment that he had been forced out of the way, Satsuki charged into the compound intent on finding her parents or sister. Naruto cursed as she sped past him and shouted for Karen to go get help before he followed Satsuki to make sure she didn't get herself hurt somehow. Unlike Kyra who was methodically searching for the enemy, Kyra made a beeline for her own household. As she went, the sight of clan members and neighbors massacred in the roads and hanging out of half-open doors, even just in her peripheral vision, had her on the verge of tears. She ran on though, splashing through a pool of blood, stumbling over the corpse of a cousin. She just kept running though, Naruto gaining on her but not quite catching up. Finally nearing her house Satsuki raced up the path and threw open the door just in time to see Itachi drive her sword through their father's chest and rip it free once again spraying his blood across both children as they entered the door. Satsuki froze at the sight. Seeing her own sister killing her father paralyzed her with shock and terror. "Why?" screaming out through her mind. She couldn't voice it though, all she could do was tremble at the sight. "Satsuki, Naruto. Run." A woman's voice called as Mikoto stumbled into the room. She had a small slash to her side, but she was much more focused on the 2 blood-splattered children within reach of her murderous elder daughter. Itachi clicked her tongue at the children and turned toward Mikoto, raising her blade to slash at the woman. "Itachi, stop." Satsuki screamed at her sister. Naruto, though, knew words would do nothing here and lashed out with his chains to prevent the killing blow. Itachi was a prodigy among prodigies though. She easily batted his first chain away before spinning and slashing the second and third away, unintentionally catching her mother across the face with her blade. Mikoto made only a muffled scream before she crumpled to the floor with her own pool of blood, causing Satsuki to scream once again, though now she no longer made understandable sounds and simply wailed loudly at the sight of her parents' bodies. Itachi batted another set of chains away before flickering closely to the 2 children, intending to catch their gazes with her own. She hesitated briefly though at the sight of 2 tomos spinning to life in each of her little sister's eyes. She already had them active before. Itachi realized before instinctively reacting to the sudden appearance of Kyra behind her, trying to drive a kunai into her neck. Itachi simply bent out of the way before spinning to lock blades with her former squad leader. The two briefly battled for dominance with a blade lock while Naruto pulled Satsuki out of the way of the fight. "I drove off your accomplice, Itachi. Why do this?" Kyra tried to begin talking her former friend down. The younger woman said nothing. She simply stepped back and disappeared into a burst of crows, catching even Kyra by surprise. The surprise was short-lived, however, as Kyra intercepted the fleeing Itachi at the door to the house and forced her back into the room. Itachi was a prodigy, but she had yet to surpass her senior and was slowly giving ground to the haddock. It didn't take long before she was on the back foot and becoming hard-pressed to hold Kyra off. The older woman was clearly furious and intent on defeating her, so Itachi had to find a way to break the engagement and flee. Noticing the cowering children once again, she felt a sickening thought run through her mind. Still, it would work. With a sudden movement, she lashed out and stabbed the tip of her sword into the retreated boy's side, careful to avoid any major organs but still cause severe bleeding. "Save him or pursue me, Kyra," Itachi said flatly before once more pulling her crow trick. Kyra cursed before rushing to Naruto's side. She checked the crying little boy over after coaxing his hands away from the wound and was at least a little relieved he wasn't severely injured, though he was bleeding heavily and needed a doctor. Satsuki had gone to her mother's side when the woman began letting out whimpers, proving that she was in fact alive. The little girl was instantly beside her, trying to do what she could. Frantically clutching at the injured woman's dress and crying in panic. "Satsuki," Kyra barked, pulling the girl out of her panic for a moment. "We need to get them to a hospital." "Mikoto, can you walk?" Kyra asked. "Why, yes, but I can't see." "She cut my eyes." Oh god, I can't see anything," Mikoto said in agony. "Satsuki, you have to lead her. We need to get them help, okay?" Kyra tried to sound calm and collected, but Naruto was bleeding so much and the only other adult in the compound was literally blind and bleeding even worse than the boy was. Satsuki did her best, guiding her mom along while Kyra carried Naruto in her arms. Thankfully, they only had to reach the gates of the compound where Karen had led the Hokage and a group of shinobi and medic nin. They quickly took over and the chaos enveloped Satsuki as everyone rushed around. Some treating Naruto and Mikoto, others looking for survivors while Kyra gave a report to the Hokage and several shinobi took off in pursuit of Itachi. All Satsuki could do was sit beside Karen and picture the sight of her mother's face. Eyes slashed and blood covered. She would never forget the sight of this night as long as she lived. Graduation. The years following the Uchiha massacre had been hard on a great many people. It was clear that among those people were Naruto and Satsuki. Karen similarly had been affected by the event, but she hadn't ever been so close to the Uchiha. Naruto obviously wasn't affected to the degree that Satsuki had been, but with the recent loss of his mother also bearing down on him, the boy had become as emotionally dependent on Satsuki as she was on him. That had led to a very worrisome issue. At least worrisome for those close to the two children. They trained non-stop, practically torturing themselves to become stronger. To protect and to avenge. They used those exact words when asked why it was they took things so far. Kyra had even eventually given up on trying to get the two to slow down their insane regimens. They were more stubborn than she had been as a child, and what was worse, any time they managed to make progress in getting one of them to relax, the other would interfere and egg them on to rejoin the damaging sessions. She wasn't a completely unbiased opinion, but Kyra was certain that the worst of the two was Satsuki. It was more often Naruto saying they should stop, not for himself, but because he always had more stamina and physical durability than his training partner did. It frustrated Kyra to no end how Satsuki would twist things around to make Naruto either feel guilty or angry, just to push him into more training. Her opinion of the little Uchiha had fallen incredibly low in the last few years. Kyra wasn't the only one concerned. Their old training group rarely got together now. Karen was more interested in training with the others, and honestly those who had watched over the Uzumaki and Uchiha survivors hadn't blamed her. Naruto and Satsuki both had extremely obsessive personalities. Ones that were obviously able to prove dangerous if mishandled. Not all of the results of the pair's training had been negative though. While they may have come to be a bit more distant from the rest of those their age, they still had their friends. They rarely got an opportunity to enjoy time together, but they had proven to be surprisingly loyal, and Kyra and the rest of the adults monitoring the kids had been happy to see the will of fire present, even in those not born of Konoha. The proof of their friends' loyalty wasn't the only boon either. Naruto and Satsuki had made it clear that they were ready to graduate long before they were allowed to. However, Hiruzen had managed to finally find time to put through an edict limiting the graduation age of genin candidates to at least that of 12, the usual age for students to leave the academy. The day was the day though. The graduation final, and Naruto and Satsuki had been preparing for it despite being certain of their success. Neither wished to hold the other back or risk being left behind in their training, and in all honesty they had stopped really gaining anything of use from the academy for quite some time. It was a good thing that Kyra and a few others had been willing to tide them over with small tests and the like, otherwise they more than likely would have gone off to try and learn something insanely dangerous on their own. One by one the students took their tests to graduate. Most of their friends passed easily enough. They had above average training as well, after all. Even Sakura seemed to ace the test, though that hadn't been especially shocking. The group of friends had discovered she was a bit of an egghead pretty early on. Something she took pride in, as she often talked about how her mom had been a pretty smart woman as well. She couldn't recall why she thought that, just that it seemed right. Either way, with their entire group of friends graduating together, both Naruto and Satsuki had been the most excited they had felt in a while at the prospect of the team assignments and seeing who they would be saddled with. Quietly they hoped for one of their friends and one another as the best possible team. They might have been a little bit biased, but they knew who they wanted and why. Life, it seemed, was a bit disappointing. Not really a shocker to either child, but still their hopes for their perfect team were so roughly crushed it seemed comical. In keeping with the tradition for each incarnation of Team 7, the Rookie of the Year and the Kunoichi of the Year were placed together alongside the dead last of their class. Going off of grades and abilities alike, Naruto easily snatched up the top spot as did Satsuki, however that left their third member. The inclusion of the dead last was something that had Naruto worried, especially when the pink-haired boy sat just behind them and greeted them both warmly but loudly. While Naruto didn't truly mind the other boy's personality that much, he still wasn't fond of Natsu Haruno. After all, he was Sakura's twin brother. While he wasn't as close with Sakura as Karen was, he still considered her a friend. The way Natsu had pretty much ignored his own blood for the last several years bothered the Uzumaki to no end. Satsuki was much the same, however she also despised just how loud and obnoxious he was. Sadly, out of the civilian-born ninja, Natsu was the only one, besides Sakura, who received plenty of training by her foster parents and foster sisters, that looked to graduate. He was barely able to pull that though. "Why the hell are you guys so stuck up?" "I'm just trying to be polite," Natsu asked with annoyance clear in his voice. Naruto and Satsuki's friends nearby winced at the boy's words. That was not the wisest of moves. Sakura in particular sided her brother's actions. She wanted to warn him that he was going to annoy his teammates before they were even an official team, but Natsu hadn't spoken to her since their father had thrown her out. As far as she knew, he blamed her for their mother's death too. Kami knows that she blamed herself. She couldn't imagine why else he would completely ignore her existence. "Stuck up?" Satsuki slowly said as if the phrase was completely alien. "Yeah, just cause you two come from high and mighty clans doesn't mean you are better than me," Natsu said with an intense challenging smirk in place. "Oh, you're right, it doesn't," Naruto said simply. "Well, I'm glad," Natsu smugly said, only for Naruto to interrupt him by continuing to speak. "Our clans don't make us better than you. We just are better than you," Naruto continued. "We have never, not a single time, seen you study or practice outside of class. Even then you are more concerned with palling around with Kiba," Satsuki said venomously, causing the Inuzuka mention to shift slightly further away from the trio. He didn't want any part of that interaction. "What are you trying to say?" Natsu growled. "But you are hardly any different than the rest of the class that didn't pass. I imagine the only way you managed to scrape by and graduate is because whatever brain power you have was the excess that couldn't fit in your sister's head." Satsuki continued to get more vicious with her verbal attack toward the Haruno boy. "Don't compare me to her. You don't know anything about me and Sakura's relationship, so don't say anything you might regret," Natsu said with a suddenly dark and menacing tone, causing Naruto to hop out of his seat. "You had better back off, Haruno," Naruto snarled as he stepped between Satsuki and Natsu, further pissing the Uchiha girl off. She shoved Naruto out of the way and glared at him briefly. "I don't need you to fight my battles." She then turned to Natsu. She debated continuing the conversation before scoffing and returning to her seat. Naruto similarly glared at Natsu before taking his own seat and shoving Satsuki lightly, causing her to glare at him again. Slowly the glare softened until she apologized for pushing him. Though she reminded him she was as much a ninja as he was, getting a nod from Naruto and his own apology. Not that he really felt sorry. In the Hokage's office, the Jonin for this batch of genin grimaced and shot Kyra pitying glances, well, those besides Kurenai who smirked at what she was seeing. "Looks like you will have your hands full with them," Asuma said to the Silverhead. "I expected as much with Naruto and Satsuki, but Natsu is gonna make everything so much more of a drag." She groaned. "Careful, keep talking like that and you'll end up like me," Shikaku said. "What? My boss sounds nice, I could give myself time off then, right?" Kyra asked jokingly. "I am happy to see you all getting along, but it's time." "Kyra, do not get lost on your way there, your team is enough of a primed exploding tag as it is." Hiruzen cut in. "Here are the team assignments and files." Iruka passed the files to the Jonin. "Yes, you know who your students are, go get them." Hiruzen commanded and the Jonin filed out of the room toward the academy. When they came to the academy they filtered into the classroom one by one, causing the kids to quiet down as full-fledged shinobi were now among them. Naruto and Satsuki brightened at the sight of Kyra, while similar happened for Sakura and Kari at the sight of Yugao. Alright, so here is how we will do this. Your sensei will call your team number and step forward, and each of you on that team will step over and follow them. Yugao, you're closest to the door so you should go first. Kyra said. Sounds fine to me. Team 12. Yugao said, smiling ever so slightly as Sakura and Kari exchanged a happy look and took off following their sensei. Their third team member, Yakumo, hesitated as she looked over at Kari. The woman gave her a reassuring smile and motioned for the girl to follow Yugao. After a brief pause she did as directed. So, next is me then. Team 10 with me. Asuma said, ushering the Ino Shikacho trio out the door as he went. Team 8. Follow me. Kurenai called getting the collection of Kiba, Shino, and Hinata. The timid girl paused at the door to glance at the Team 7 members before she left. Specifically one member of Team 7. Well, that leaves you 3 for me then, I guess. Kyra said as she looked over her team. She knew Naruto and Satsuki well, but she hadn't paid much attention to Natsu until she'd been told who would be on her team earlier that morning. She doubted Naruto or Satsuki knew him that well either and vice versa. Best to start with introductions, but first a little cardio would do them some good. Meet me on top of the Hokage monument in 5 minutes or you are going back to the academy. She simply said before bursting into a cloud of smoke causing Naruto and Satsuki to bolt for the window and Natsu to squawk in shock. As he watched his 2 teammates leap out the window the pink-haired boy stammered for only a moment before attempting to follow their lead. Sadly he was less agile than the 2 of them and instead of rolling with his momentum, he simply flipped into the dirt. The impact knocked the wind out of him and created a cloud of dust that choked him even further as he wheezed out a pained groan. Slowly he collected himself and began a slow run toward the nearby stairs that led up to the top of the monument mountain. Eventually he caught his breath and managed to set into a much better rhythm as he quickly scaled the stairs. As he reached the top, huffing from the exertion the 3 other members of his new team turned to look at him. All of them looked completely rested and unbothered by the climb. How? The stairs? Natsu asked getting a snort from Naruto and a scoff from Satsuki. Natsu, first thing is first why did you go out the window like Naruto and Satsuki? Kyra had to ask. She'd witnessed him plummet to the ground. Also, are you alright? Nothing broken. Well I saw them do it and you said we only had 5 minutes. Natsu tried to argue. You could have taken the stairs in the academy and you probably wouldn't have been much slower considering how much hurting yourself slowed you down. You aren't hurt still right? Just some bruising? She asked again. Her students were her responsibility after all. No sensei. Natsu replied with a blush. Oh well, let's get started by introducing ourselves properly. I want to hear your full name, your likes and dislikes, any dreams you have, basic things. Kyra said. Sounds pretty personal, not basic to me. Satsuki replied. Humor me. Kyra replied with a too pleasant of tone to be actually pleasant. Fine, why don't you go first sensei? After all, we need to know who's going to be teaching us. Naruto turned it back on the woman. He knew Kyra better than almost anyone in Konoha did still she was an aloof and mysterious person, so that knowledge wasn't really that expansive. Fine. I'll start you off. I'm Kyra Haddock, your Jonin sensei. I like a couple people better than most and dislike 1 or 2 more than the others, and my dream is private and incredibly adult. She said while smirking behind her mask at the mix of pouts and scowls from her students. Naruto, you're next. She said with a nod toward the boy. My name is Naruto Uzumaki, as if any of you didn't know I like my clan and training I guess. I dislike a few people and people who lie to me. My dream is to rebuild my clan. Naruto said quickly and clearly. Very good, Satsuki. Kyra motioned to the Uchiha. Satsuki Uchiha, I like training. I dislike a lot of things like this nonsense and Natsu. My dream is private. She said while fidgeting slightly at the thoughts running through her head. Kyra and Naruto both stared at Satsuki for a moment. They were sure that the girl was thinking about getting revenge for her dream, but they didn't call her out on it. Natsu was glaring at the girl for her comment or disliking him, but she was used to him looking at her like that and wasn't really bothered all that much. Finally we come to you. Go ahead. Kyra said as she turned to face Natsu. The boy blinked for a moment as he dropped his glare on Satsuki and leaned back to think for a moment. After taking long enough to get a pair of annoyed sighs from Naruto and Satsuki, Natsu began his own introduction. I'm Natsu Haruno. I really like fire and jutsu with fire. I dislike people who butt into my business when they shouldn't and a certain person I guess. I want to fix something for my dream and gain clan status. Natsu declared. Fix something? What kind of dream is that? And do you really think you can gain clan status just like that? Satsuki sniped. At least I said my dream, what kind of cop-out is just saying my dream is private? Natsu asked. Like yours was any better, how vague and overreaching can you be? She asked with plenty of snark in her tone. Alright, that's enough. Don't you all feel much closer after that session? Kyra asked sarcastically. She simply sighed at the blank angry stare that the kids shot back at her. Listen up, tomorrow morning is my exam. If you fail, I boot you back to the academy. Be at training ground 7 by 6 or don't bother showing up. With that she burst into another cloud of smoke before any of them could respond. I still can't tell when she is using a clone. Naruto grumbled as he and Satsuki left. Natsu stared after them. He felt an odd sense of loneliness at that moment but quickly shook it off to head home. Kyra dropped down beside Rin as she worked at cleaning up the grave of Kushina. Right beside it was Obito's. The only one not present here was Minato's as his body was placed within the Hokage crypts. So Rin asked in a sort of sing-song voice. They are going to be a pain in the ass. Kyra replied bluntly, getting a snort of laughter from the brunette. All new genin are a pain in the ass, Kyra. They are children after all. Rin said. Not like this. It's like there's two of little me with all my angst and crap and an Obito. A bright pink louder Obito. Kyra explained. Oof, yeah, that kind of sucks, but I think that you may be missing the biggest people for this team. Rin said as she finished wiping off the lettering of Kushina's name. Kyra's visibly eye scrunched up in thought as she tried to understand her old teammate's words. She couldn't quite grasp it, which made the other girls sigh as Kyra always struggled with this sort of thing. Kyra, they aren't us. Natsu isn't Obito, Naruto and Satsuki most certainly aren't you, and you aren't Minato-sensei. Rin said as she rose up to her feet and looked down at the woman. I know that. Kyra snapped, standing up to look Rin in the eye. She was offended by that thought entirely. So you? Rin asked. The pair stared at one another in silence for a moment before Rin sighed and pinched the bridge of her nose. Kyra was a genius in practically everything, but she could also be hung up on weird notions she got into her head. Rin knew that her friend was a bit obsessive when it came to Naruto. She wasn't judging, he had a lot of both his parents in him and at times some of their lost teammates showed up as well. Just as his parents had wanted Naruto was, to an extent, like Obito. Which might be a problem for Kyra. She had a habit of burying her emotions so deep not even she could recognize them. Rin however had known Kyra since they were both little children. Long before being on Team 7 together. Kyra, just try and stay focused on educating them alright. You and I both know they will pass tomorrow. Naruto and Satsuki won't accept any other resort and neither will the Hokage. I don't really know Natsu except in passing, but he seems like a good enough kid. At least more like a normal kid than you, Naruto, and Satsuki ever got to be. Don't take that away from him right off the bat. Try and ease him into shinobi life so he doesn't end up like me or worse like Obito. Please. Rin lectured and pleaded with Kyra. The Haddock woman shuffled as Ron's words soaked into her. She knew there was more that Rin had wanted to say concerning Naruto in particular. That was typical of Rin though. She was there to help however she could, but when her friends were trying to figure something out, she wouldn't just give them an answer. Hopefully she would figure out what the former Kunoichi was trying to tell her before it blew up in her face. Sure, do you want to get dinner? I saw Naruto and Satsuki headed to see Mikoto, so they won't be there for you to cook tonight. Kyra asked. Yeah, Ichiraku's like old times. Rin asked. Sounds good. Kyra replied, happy to spend time with Rin. The pair of friends meandered back to the market area and over to the ramen stand to enjoy some nostalgia and a warm meal. Naruto helped guide Mikoto to her place at the table as Satsuki dipped up the meal. It was simple but filling and nutritious. Satsuki wasn't really one for bold flavors, food for her was more or less just fuel. That didn't mean she didn't have her favorites and she usually enjoyed a sliced up tomato with her meal. It smells wonderful, Satsuki. Mikoto praised, though she missed the way Satsuki's eyes drifted to the bandage concealing Mikoto's own blind eyes. Thank you, better dig in before it gets cold. Satsuki quickly said. Naruto glanced at the girl and felt his heart hurt for her. Satsuki had admitted to him that she was slowly growing bitter toward her mother. With medical jutsu at the stage it was, transfer of eyes was not that risky of an operation. Mikoto refused, unintentionally burdening her daughter with caring for her. She never brought it up to her mother though. In fact, she went out of her way to talk about the night at all, unless it was to twist Naruto into training with her more. It's delicious, sweetheart. Mikoto said with a smile. Satsuki smiled faintly, though it was weak and didn't show as brightly okay her face as her smiles had as a child. Thanks mom. She replied, forcing a bit of extra cheer into her voice. Naruto grabbed hold of the girl's hand and squeezed it, causing her to glance his way. He smiled to comfort her, getting her own grin to soften from the hard-forced appearance it had and become more genuine. The meal was pleasant and Mikoto giggled as the two complained about their teammate and the attitude Kyra seemed to have. Before long though it was time for Naruto to head home as he had a distance to go and needed to be well rested for the test the next morning. Satsuki helped her mother to get ready for bed while he left for the night. When he reached the Uzumaki clan compound he found that Karen and her mother had both already gone to sleep and Rin was nowhere to be found. He got cleaned up and ready for bed before setting all his equipment out for the next day. Natsu had a poor night. He came home to his empty apartment, one he had gotten to distance himself from anything to do with his father. Natsu had given up everything connecting him to that man, barring his name. He would never surrender that. It was the only thing that still tied him to his sister after all. Natsu, to most people, was a bit of a clown and goofy boy that didn't take anything seriously. That was truly his personality, to an extent. He wasn't as dumb as most people believed him to be. He wasn't especially bright like his elder twin, but he most definitely wasn't stupid. The only thing in the world that really mattered was your own will and your connections. Natsu didn't have any of the latter, so he had to make it up with the former. That is at least until he made connections. That was the root for his outgoing tendencies. He needed to be seen and respected. It would take some time, but he was determined to make it happen. One day he would reach his real goal, there was just a very long road between then and the present. He walked onto the training ground as the last one, 3.5 minutes before 6, only to find both Naruto and Satsuki there, finishing up a series of calisthenics performed on the side of a tree. He'd seen shinobi perform such actions beforehand, and he knew that it was a relatively basic skill. Unlike them though, he had no one around to teach him advanced techniques. Everything beyond the basic skills taught in the academy he had figured out for himself. That was part of why he didn't really like Naruto and Satsuki all that much. They acted like they were so much better than anyone else, when all it really was that separated them from the average student had been teachers there to hold their hands. Who were they to look down on him when he had developed his own skills through struggle and all they had done was ask, "What are you staring at?" Naruto asked Natsu as he returned to the ground. "Nothing, just wondering why you would do your exercises on the tree like that when you can just do them on the ground," Natsu replied. He didn't think picking a fight with the two about how good they had it was the best thing to do right before their team test. It helps work on chakra control and stamina, plus it's harder on the muscles. Satsuki replied as she flipped off of the tree and landed beside her fiancé. Oh, was all Natsu had said before the group slipped into silence. Naruto and Satsuki awkwardly glanced at one another before Kyra appeared using the body flicker technique. She squinted her eye in a way that suggested she was smiling at them and waved them over to her. The kids did as they were instructed and made their way to her. "Can any of you tell me what these are?" Kyra asked, producing a pair of bells. The kids all blinked before Natsu raised his hand like he was still in the academy. Kyra sighed, that was going to need to be drilled out of their heads. She hadn't realized how mundane the academy education really was. She didn't really do much with students after all, and Naruto and Satsuki were far from average academy students. "You don't need to raise your hand, Natsu," Kyra said. "Oh, alright. Bells?" Natsu asked hesitantly, expecting it to be a trick question. "Correct. Today, you will be trying to take these bells from me. You will have until noon, at which point I will decide your fate. That's 6 hours to get them away from me. You can use any jutsu you know and I expect you to come at me like you want to kill me. Anything less would be an insult to my skill. You really don't want to insult me. I can promise you that," Kyra explained. "Now, any questions before we get started?" Kyra asked as she secured the bells on her belt. "There's a reason why there's only 2 bells, isn't there?" Satsuki asked, getting Kyra to smile at her. "I was hoping you would notice." "Yes, there are only 2 bells so only 2 of you will pass." The older woman shrugged as she spoke. Natsu's mind went into panic mode. This test had just gone from difficult to practically impossible. He knew that Kyra was far out of his league in skill, or at least she should be as a jonin. To pit them against each other made it all that much harder, but in this situation it really wasn't fair. Naruto and Satsuki were fiancés. The other students had gossiped about it forever when word got out. They rarely argued and practically did everything together. On top of that, Natsu was pretty sure if either were to fail they would get a pass anyway. They were from old clans after all. That left only one option, he had to act first, and he had to act fast. As Natsu twisted his fingers into a hand sign, Kyra's eye did Naruto and Satsuki's. The pink-haired boy then launched himself at Kyra at the same time that he let loose a blast of flame from his left hand. It was almost as if he had thrown a punch made of fire at her. The jonin easily evaded and countered the boy's advance. She kicked his legs out from under him, only to again be surprised as he placed his hands into a hand sign again. This time creating a bastardized version of the great fireball technique that Satsuki loved so much. Kyra bent backward at the waist, avoiding the flames before slamming a foot down on her prospective student's midsection, knocking the wind out of him. He curled inward at the pain caused by the stomp, but Kyra wasn't done with him. She flicked her leg behind him, and with a kick upward the boy was launched up into the air around eye level with Kyra herself, who wrapped him up tightly in her arms and drew a kunai against his neck. "I didn't say go yet, Natsu," Kyra said, reprimanding the boy. Internally though her focus was on the same thing that had Naruto and Satsuki's attention. What the hell was that? Naruto asked. Yeah, where did you learn those jutsu? Satsuki wondered aloud. I didn't learn them, I made them. Natsu answered as he shifted his eyes to the hand holding a knife at his throat. Impressive. Now try again, but this time wait until I say go. Kyra shoved the genin into the other two, knocking them all off balance as she hopped back to get some distance. It didn't take Natsu long to break himself free from his two teammates and once more create a short series of hand signs. The series ended in the tiger sign and he swept his hands back and then forward like the beating of wings, creating two cascading walls of flames that roared across the training field toward Kyra. Naruto and Satsuki watched on in shock as Natsu unleashed fire jutsu after fire jutsu at their sensei. None landed of course, but the fact that he could manage so many attacks in such a short amount of time, despite their chakra requirement, and the fact that he clearly had made the jutsus himself, was impressive. Satsuki, come on. Naruto said using the opportunity that Natsu was unintentionally giving them a chance to escape into the tree line so that they could better plan for the test. The pair fled back to the relative safety of the trees but continued to watch as Natsu gradually ran out of steam. Slowly he had begun to use less and less of his ninjutsu in exchange for trying to land blows with his taijutsu. Sadly he was not that talented with hand-to-hand. His mix of movesets were a sloppy combination of what they had been taught as the basics in the academy. He focused on his ninjutsu completely. He's terrible at close quarters. Satsuki said as she observed her classmate continue his attempts against Kyra. Yeah. He's only buying us a little time, so we need to figure something out and fast. You know what it's like to spar with Kyra. Naruto said, trying to get the girl to focus. Right. The Uchiha girl turned to face him expecting him to have a plan. Disappointingly Naruto lacked such a plan. He bit his lip in concentration, but nothing was coming to mind. He didn't want to be like Natsu who simply charged headfirst to Kyra and hoped to get lucky. They needed an actual strategy. It wasn't like they had a chance to beat Kyra otherwise. Naruto paused and really thought about that. They had no chance. Honestly even with a strategy he couldn't see how he and Satsuki would be enough to overcome Kyra. That was when he realized the obvious objective of the test. It helped that the inkling memory of a story about the bell test given to the previous Team 7 when Kyra was his age was making itself known. We need to get Natsu. We can only beat the test if we all work together. Naruto explained. What do you mean? There's only this is more of Kyra's mind game crap. Satsuki grumbled, causing Naruto to chuckle. Yeah, so we need to get Natsu out of there so we can figure out exactly how to win. Naruto coaxed. Why are you waiting for me to make a plan? Satsuki asked. Cause Kyra is pretty much the one who taught me everything. Well I know you talked to your mom about her old missions when she was our age all the time. Come on, she's going to get bored of playing with him soon. Naruto hurried her. Fine, just let me think okay. Satsuki said as she looked over the fight in the training ground. By now it had become a game of cat and mouse as Kyra batted around the exhausted-looking Natsu across the clearing. Satsuki grimaced at the sight. This wasn't going to be a walk in the park. Kyra was just toying with them, but she was still leagues above them. I have an idea. Satsuki said before turning to Naruto. You need to start making clones. As Kyra flipped the roughed-up form of her little pink-haired student, she was a bit caught off guard by a half-dozen clones of Naruto, charging her with clear intent to try and carve her up with their kunai. None even got close. Except the one she used to dispel the rest. It technically had been very close, being as she had used it as a makeshift club on the others. It was then that she realized the cloud of smoke caused by the clones had been the real move by Naruto. She had to wonder if that was the boy's idea or if it was Satsuki's. Either way it was a good strategy to obscure their real move. The moment she felt a chain controlled by Naruto nearly wrap around her leg, she realized they hoped to pin her down and attack her once she was immobilized. Smart, it was about the best they could do in this situation. Still, she easily stepped out of the chain's way and brought up her kunai to send another two off course. For the next several moments she deflected repetitive attacks from the chains. As the cloud of smoke seemed to fail to that realization, Kyra ran through a brief series of hand signs, leading her to release a small gust of wind that cleared away the cloud of smoke, revealing a set of smoke-maker seals dropped on the ground. No doubt they were Naruto's handiwork. The real Naruto now stood clearly ahead of her, his smoke cover removed. He wasn't just sitting there though. A mass of his chains moved to assault Kyra, while even more remained around him as a defense. Kyra noticed that Satsuki and Natsu were moving away from the clearing at a fast speed. It looked like the kids were figuring out the real test already. That was good. She needed to leave Naruto with an example of why not to take her so lightly though. With a fluctuation of chakra, Kyra cast a genjutsu on Naruto to try and catch him off guard. For Naruto though, his mind knew something was wrong, but it couldn't properly translate what he knew to be a genjutsu. Instead his senses were overloaded and his mind embraced the illusion against his will. The world shifted around him, and suddenly he found himself surrounded by the fresh corpses of Kyra, Satsuki, Karen, and even his mother. Surrounding him were the shadowy forms of a half-dozen kumonin, and at their head was Itachi, dressed in a blend of Konoha Anbu and hidden cloud attire. Blood dripped from their swords, and besides Itachi they grinned down at Naruto for what they had done. They wouldn't have had to die if you had just been a little bit better. Itachi's cold voice said as she shifted her grip on her ninjato and moved forward to attack him. Naruto, filled with rage at the sight of his loved ones, even those now long dead, butchered around him and the hidden cloud and Itachi herself who had caused him and his family no small amount of heartache, lost it. He roared in rage and pain and dumped massive amounts of chakra into his chains as they ripped through the clearing and the phantom cloud nin alike. Kyra leapt backward as Naruto screamed and unleashed more chains than she had ever seen him use. The attack tore deep trenches into the ground and ripped trees to shreds as they wildly flailed around the boy. Realizing he was a danger to himself and the others, Kyra released her genjutsu, causing the attack to stop and Naruto to quickly flee from the clearing back to whatever rendezvous he and Satsuki had planned. I really need to work on genjutsu with him. The way he immediately stopped the attack and retreated, I think he knew he was a genjutsu but couldn't break it before he lost it. Kyra thought out loud as she watched him go. As Naruto caught up with Satsuki and Natsu, Satsuki gave him a look causing him to chuckle and scratch the back of his head. What was that sound, like explosions or something? Satsuki asked him. Well, Kyra caught me in a genjutsu for a little bit. Naruto replied. Satsuki gave the redhead boy a deadpan stare at the poor answer. There was no way that was anywhere close to the full answer. She didn't have time to pry at the moment though and turned her attention back onto Natsu. The pink-haired boy was simply nodding along commenting about how much he hates genjutsu. Satsuki scrunched her eyes closed and shook her head. These two were going to give her a headache and she could already tell. With a sigh she opened her eyes and glared down at Natsu. We have to work together, all of us. Satsuki said. There are only 2 bells. I am not about to be a pawn for a couple of clan brats. Natsu growled. Relax, this whole thing is a mind game. Kyra pulls this kind of thing all the time, trust us, she helped raise us. Naruto said. Natsu was quiet for a while. He didn't really have an alternative to trusting them. He couldn't get a bell alone, and if what they were saying was really true, it wouldn't matter if he managed to pull off a miracle. It stung at his pride a bit, but slowly he began to nod. Fine, but don't screw me over. I'll get you back for it if you do. I swear. Natsu said seriously. Whatever, now we need a plan. Satsuki said. I think I have something. Naruto leaned in as he spoke and began outlining the plan as he scribbled into the dirt with a stick. Finally. Kyra sighed as she leaned around a series of shurikens shooting past her. I was just about to come after you 3. You are really dragging this out. You said we have until noon, it's not even 10. Natsu said as he let loose a torrent of flames. Nearby Satsuki did the same, boxing Kyra in, or at least giving the appearance of boxing her in. The gap between Genin and Jonin, even Genin as skilled as they were, could be pretty wide. That was when Naruto arrived, in a force of nearly a dozen clones, each running through the hand signs for their own jutsu. The blast of wind chakra fed into the flames Satsuki and Natus had already launched and fueled the attacks with such power that they expanded to easily quadruple the size of the original attacks. At this Kyra's eyes widened as she performed a substitution and stared in shock at the ash remains of the log she had used. Don't look so shocked Kyra, you told us to come at you with the intent to kill right? Naruto asked. But how would you get the bells if you destroy them? Kyra wondered. Who cares about those bells? We know this test is for us to work together. Want us to keep showing you? Satsuki asked. I used up a lot of chakra earlier, but I think we all have enough to keep doing this till you slip up. Natsu added with a vicious grin. Kyra looked over at the 3 and nearly smiled at them. Side by side ready to fight her. Just as she had wanted. Fine. You 3 win. Now come here Team 7. Kyra said as she motioned for them to come up to her. When they stopped in front of her she took a moment to look them each in their eyes before she nodded. Yesterday each of you were given a chance to introduce yourselves to one another. Whether through hiding it or an outright lie you each lied about your dreams. You didn't want to share them because you didn't trust one another. You might not fully trust each other still, but if you want to continue as a member of Team 7, you will have to learn to trust in each other to do their part just like you did for this test. Now I want you to do your introductions again, but this time focus on your dream and be honest. Show a little trust. Kyra explained. The trio were silent for a moment before Natsu twisted to face the other 2 genin. I'm Natsu Haruno, and my dream is to earn shinobi clan status so that my sister will be a family with me again. The boys' words shocked Naruto and Satsuki before they grinned and smirked respectively. That hadn't been what they expected from Natsu at all, but they were extremely happy to hear what he said. Naruto even mentally planned to do what he could to help the twins patch up their relationship. I guess, I'll go next. I'm Satsuki Uchiha. I plan on bringing my sister to justice and having a child that will restore the Uchiha clan. Satsuki said. She would leave it to one of her future children. After all, she was going to be the Uzumaki matriarch, not the Uchiha. I'm Naruto Uzumaki. I just want to protect my loved ones and make good on a promise I made to my mom. He said with a soft smile, remembering the woman. Now that's more like it. You three are now officially Team 7, my team. I didn't really plan on you all getting the meaning of the test so quickly. So we will work on some basics before we all go to lunch. A mix of a team building exercise and chakra control training. Natsu, we are going to work together to get you climbing trees. Kyra said with her characteristic eye smile. Wait, like they were this morning? Natsu asked. You bet. Kyra replied as she led them over to the trunk of a tree. You'll get it down before you know it, after lunch we can come back and work on it some more. Naruto offered, causing Natsu to blink in surprise before nodding with a smile. Maybe these two clan brats wouldn't be so bad. What if Naruto has Uzumaki clan ancestor bloodline? Thanks for watching my video till the end. If you enjoy this content, then do consider subscribing to my channel and leave a like if you guys need the next part, comment down, and thanks for watching the video and see you guys in the next video.